Chapter 456. Which places on Earth had the densest spiritual energy? If one were to look abroad, then Europe's Vatican, the Middle East's Jerusalem, Spain's Santiago, India's Lily Garden, and Nepal's Kathmandu were all places with extremely abundant spiritual energy. As the saying goes, rain and dew are all touched. Earth was so big, so naturally, it was impossible for all the spiritual energy to be concentrated in Huaxia. Therefore, under the constant baptism of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, many legacies similar to cultivators appeared abroad, such as the onmyoges and ninjas of Japan, the knights, sorcerers, and vampires of Europe, the pharaohs and mummies of Egypt, as well as the black magic and voodoo of South Asia. These legacies seemed to be varied, but in essence, they were not much different from the legacies of the orthodox cultivators. And this seemed to coincide with the old saying, the great Tao flowed like mercury, and every grain was round. However, perhaps it was because they had only appeared for a short time, so most of the cultivation legacies abroad had not formed a complete system. If they were compared to primitive people who had just entered the Stone Age, then the cultivation legacy represented by Qin Shi was obviously a high-level cosmic civilization that could freely travel the stars. The difference between the two was no less than the difference between heaven and earth. It was precisely because of this that Qin Shi guessed that the ancient cultivators represented by the Tai Ching divine ancestor might have come to Earth from a cultivation holy land. Otherwise, how could one explain the existence of Tiandu? The recovery of spiritual energy was a very long process. Just like when it was exhausted, the whole process might last 10 years, 100 years, or even 1,000 years. However, even if the spiritual energy of heaven and earth on Earth had not reached its peak, just based on the current situation, Earth was already very suitable for cultivators to live and reproduce here. In the eyes of Cheng Hua and Yi Ji, Earth was like a new continent that had not been discovered by Columbus. The environment here was good and resources were abundant. The only bad thing was, it was probably the indigenous people who had a population of 7 billion. There were indeed too many people. Moreover, most of them had poor aptitudes and were not worth absorbing. Even if they captured these people and brought them back to do hard labor, Cheng Hua would feel that it was a waste of food. The two of them quietly landed on Earth on the cloud-piercing shuttle. The place where they landed, it was none other than Yellowstone Park, where Qin Shi had refined the Adumbra flower. The spirit chi in this place was surging, and some of the medicinal power left behind by Qin Shi when he was refining pills could be faintly felt. Therefore, Yellowstone Park naturally became the first stop of their trip. If I remember the name correctly, this should be a low-level technological civilization. Cheng Hua steered the cloud-piercing shuttle through the skies of the United States. Occasionally, he would lower his head to look at the buildings below. Naturally, the buildings on Earth were extremely strange to the two of them. Although Cheng Hua was young, he could be considered to be experienced and knowledgeable. Therefore, he recognized at a glance that Earth's development was a little off track. The once glorious Tianshu ruins, how could they have been reduced to a mediocre technological civilization? One had to know that technological civilizations were usually born on planets without spiritual energy. The Tianshu ruins clearly had the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, so why did the development of Earth's civilization deviate? In this regard, although Cheng Hua was somewhat puzzled, he was more pleasantly surprised in his heart. Along the way, he did not detect any signs of true origin fluctuations on anyone, so he could basically be sure that this was a cultivation holy land without any immortal cultivator's inheritance. And what did this mean? It meant that even if he was only at the golden core stage, he could do whatever he wanted here without any fear. When he thought of this, Cheng Hua was suddenly very excited. He could not help but want to remove his aura concealment technique and directly descend on Earth as if he was the king of the world. Seeing this, Yi Ji was still able to remain sober for the time being. Don't get excited, let's find out the truth first. Even if it's a low-level technological civilization, there should be some kind of weapon that can threaten us. The two of us are new here, so it's better not to be too ostentatious. After all, to these natives, we're guests from the boundless starry sky. Yi Ji seemed to be advising Cheng Hua to be careful. In reality, even he could not help but feel a little arrogant at this moment. After all, the two of them were only teenagers. If they were not arrogant when they were young, why would they enter the world? Of course, being arrogant was one thing, but for the sake of caution, Iji still suggested that they capture one of the natives to understand the situation. Okay, we'll do as you say. I'll go capture one of them and ask about the situation. After saying that, without waiting for Iji to reply, Changhua could no longer suppress the excitement in his heart. He actually jumped out of the cloud-piercing shuttle just like that. One had to know that the two of them were now in a small town not far from Yellowstone Park. This was a tourist town. There were not many residents, only about 1,000 or so. After Changhua jumped out of the cloud-piercing shuttle, he flew straight to the market in the center of the town like Superman. He did not hide his figure anymore. Instead, he deliberately grabbed an unlucky young man in front of everyone in the market. This young man was bound by his true origin. Instantly, he was like a doll in a claw machine, lifted into the air by an invisible hand. Who is the person in charge here? Tell him to come out and see me. At this moment, the two of them were very much like bandits going down the mountain to rob someone. The target of the robbery was naturally the mansion of a big family on Earth. Iji's idea was to first disguise as a servant and infiltrate the mansion. After finding out the situation, he would then take over the mansion in one fell swoop. However, Changhua could not be bothered to do such a thing. When the bandits came to rob, the owner was not at home. Could it be that the bandits would obediently wait for the owner to come back? The most straightforward method was to openly go to the door like Changhua did. Not only could he immediately find out the strength of the mansion's defenses, but he could also force the owner of the mansion to appear immediately. Wouldn't that be the fastest way to go? Changhua's attitude was not very friendly. Coupled with his shocking appearance, it instantly scared the people in the market. The people of the United States had always been obsessed with filming superhero blockbusters. But Changhua right now? Wasn't he very much like the villains that often appeared in movies? The unlucky young man was scared witless by Changhua on the spot. He talked a lot, but Changhua didn't understand what he was talking about. In this regard, Changhua was not in a hurry. He directly took out a spiritual talisman from his pocket and slapped it between the young man's eyebrows. The function of this spiritual talisman was very simple, and that was to translate. It did not translate the young man's words word by word. Instead, it copied the young man's words with one spirit. Almost instantly, Changhua could learn the language used by the young man. However, just as Changhua was busy learning English, a very discordant sound suddenly rang out in the market. Bang! 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 It was the sound of a gunshot. Seeing that Changhua could freely float in the air like Superman and make threatening moves to the town's residents, the town's police patrolling the market directly took out their guns and decisively fired. Chapter 457. This scene was really similar to the movie Superman, Man of Steel. But whether it was in the movie or in reality, when the United States police encountered a similar incident, they would definitely do the same decisively, take out a gun and shoot. It couldn't be helped. Who asked the people abroad to live in the abyss of suffering all year round? The police's actions were understandable, but when all this fell into Chenghua's eyes, his reaction was much more intense than the villain in the movie. You want to die? A mere 5.56mm bullet naturally could not penetrate Chenghua's protective aura. But, this provocative action also successfully provoked Chenghua's anger. He was the pride of the Supreme Palace enclosure. How could he tolerate this group of lowly ants wantonly provoking him? So, without any hesitation, Changhua directly formed a sword with the fingers of his left hand and pointed at the unlucky United States police below. Then, a small metal sword about 3 inches long suddenly shot out from Chenghua's sleeve. The small metal sword was extremely fast. The townsfolk next to them only saw a flash of white light in the air. When they turned their heads to look at the police, they saw that there was a 2-finger-wide wound between his eyebrows, and blood kept gushing out from it. The police fell to the ground. The townsfolk were suddenly in a mess. And just as everyone screamed and fled back to their houses, a burst of urgent sirens suddenly sounded on the street not far away. It must be mentioned here that the United States was not only the country with the highest crime rate in the world, but also the country with the fastest police speed in the world. Therefore, just as Chung Hua killed a police officer, the town police station had already received the news and organized a large group of people to rush here. Chung Hua naturally heard the movement in the distance, but he had no intention of hiding. Instead, he just floated over the market and threw the young man he caught before to the ground. One had to know that Chung Hua was now flying in the sky, about 4 or 5 stories above the ground. Therefore, when the young man fell to the ground, he immediately let out a heart-wrenching scream. However, Chung Hua didn't seem to hear it. Instead, he was still looking at the various objects and decorations in the market with interest. Such an act of disregard for life was indeed in line with the old saying, "Those who are not of my race are bound to have a different heart." Just a low-level technological civilization. In Chung Hua's opinion, these people were actually more like ants walking upright, so how could he possibly feel guilty for trampling a few ants to death? Chung Hua was deliberately looking for trouble today. The bigger the commotion, the more they could use it to find out the details of the Tianshu ruins. This action seemed a little reckless, but in fact, it was the most direct and effective method. After all, Chung Hua had the cloud-piercing shuttle with him. Even if he really encountered any danger, he could use the cloud-piercing shuttle to escape. It was truly a situation where one could advance to attack or retreat to defend. Before the battle had even begun, one had already obtained the initiative. Chung Hua's provocation with great fanfare quickly attracted the town's police department's encirclement and suppression. Towards this non-human existence, the police chief was very wise not to shout and persuade him to surrender. Instead, he directly ordered Chung Hua to be killed on the spot. The equipment of the United States Police was much better than the equipment of the Huaxia Police. Following the police chief's shout of "fire," the town that hadn't been so lively in a long time suddenly became as lively as the new year. A series of crackling gunshots rang out, more lively than the fireworks of the new year. In an instant, countless bullets shot out from the barrel of the gun and rained down on Chung Hua. The United States Police never gave criminals any chance to speak, but unfortunately, Chung Hua wasn't an ordinary criminal. He was a golden core cultivator who could fly in the sky and burrow into the ground. How could he be injured by mere bullets? Therefore, Chung Hua was like watching a tiger's performance through glass in a zoo. No matter how the other party bared their fangs and brandished their claws at him, he just quietly flew in the air without moving. The bullets were all blocked by the protective chi around his body. After the first round of attacks, when everyone was busy reloading, Chung Hua's voice slowly rang out above the market. "Are you done? Then it's my turn." The United States people couldn't understand his alien language, but that didn't matter. Because they would soon fall asleep forever. Chung Hua waved his hand and dozens of small metal swords flew out of his sleeves. Wherever the small swords passed, blood sprayed out. In just a breath's time, the town regained its tranquility. Chung Hua looked at the pile of corpses below in boredom, but then he lost interest and muttered, "Too weak." He was still floating in the air above the market as if he was demonstrating his power. Not long after the town's police station was wiped out, the news spread quickly, layer by layer. In the end, it directly alarmed the higher-ups of the United States military. After hearing that the other party might be in existence comparable to a superhero, the army station near Yellowstone Park immediately took action. The United States people's exoskeleton technology was becoming more and more mature. In terms of individual strength, soldiers wearing exoskeleton armor were not weaker than peak-strength martial artists. However, it was this special operations team that had the best individual ability in the U.S. Army that was monitoring their bodily functions was completely disabled the moment they got close to Chung Hua. Warning. Warning. This is a cultivator from Huaxia. His strength is far beyond X level. It was strange. Although Chung Hua came from outside the solar system, he still had a standard Asian appearance. Moreover, he was different from the emaciated and sallow Asians in Southeast Asia. Therefore, the United States military recognized him as a Huaxia person almost immediately. A celestial from Huaxia? Why did he suddenly come to the United States to cause trouble? one should know that there were many unwritten rules in this world. One of them was, existences above peak strength usually did not step out of the country. The reason was very simple. Once a peak strength grandmaster left the country, the United States people would use all kinds of methods to capture these grandmasters who were close to superpowers for experiments. They wanted to perfect their exoskeleton armor through science and achieve the goal of mass-producing peak strength grandmasters. Japan was the little brother of the United States people. Moreover, the Enyang Liao controlled almost all the practitioners in Japan. Therefore, the United States people rarely captured Enyang masters for experiments. Huaxia and Japan were different. There were too many rogue practitioners in Huaxia. There were simply too many existences like Sun Wen. Therefore, they became the main source of experimental materials. Although martial artists and necromancers had combat strength far beyond ordinary people, they were still too weak to fight against the state machine. You know martial arts, I know science. Even peak strength martial artists knew how to cherish their lives. How could a celestial easily provoke the United States? Other than Chen Shi, no one would want to test the power of a nuclear bomb. X level was very powerful and rare. The United States people had been coveting this level for a long time. They just could not find suitable experimental materials. Therefore, when the Pentagon confirmed that Cheng Hua was at least X level, the senior military officials present were collectively excited. As long as they captured this X level, the bottleneck of exoskeleton armor technology would be able to achieve a breakthrough. God bless the United States. Chapter 458. Ever since the end of the Second War of Independence, the United States had never been baptized by the flames of war. It could not be helped. After all, the United States was the only superpower in the world today. Their tyrannical military strength gave the United States great confidence. Therefore, they had always been the ones to behave atrociously in other people's territory. Now, how could they tolerate others to behave atrociously in their territory? Therefore, the moment the Special Operations Team was destroyed, the Department of Homeland Security and the National Guard had already organized and sent a large group of people to the front line. The American Army needed to gather, but Cheng Hua did not need to. While he was waiting for the other party's reinforcements to arrive, Cheng Hua was so bored that he started to wander around the town's market. About 20 minutes later, the first batch of National Guard arrived at the scene. The American Army first alienated the local townspeople through the broadcast. Then, they started to persuade Cheng Hua to surrender. At this time, Cheng Hua could already understand English. However, he ignored all these words and did not take them to heart at all. It was just a low-level technological civilization. Could they really hurt him? Cheng Hua had already seen the power of the 5.56mm bullet. This kind of attack that was like scratching an itch also caused Cheng Hua's judgment of the threat of the Tianshu ruins to drop by several levels. Therefore, Cheng Hua could not help but feel a little arrogant. He even hoped that the other party could give him a little surprise. However, he did not expect that this surprise would come so quickly. Cheng Hua had greatly underestimated the lethality of a technological civilization. Therefore, he did not prepare any defense at all. After waiting for the townspeople to evacuate and there was no response after 3 rounds of shouting, the American Army officially launched an attack on Cheng Hua. Swoosh! Following a loud and ear-piercing sonic boom, an anti-tank missile hit the shop Cheng Hua was in. The surrounding shops also instantly turned into a sea of fire in this explosion. The bullet could not penetrate Cheng Hua's protective chi, but the anti-tank missile was different. In his carelessness, Cheng Hua was sent flying by the anti-tank missile. If it weren't for the fact that he still had a defensive magic treasure on him, he was afraid that he would have suffered heavy injuries on the spot because of this. The dust raised by the collapse of the house made Cheng Hua look a little dusty. After a brief moment of shock, Cheng Hua was completely enraged. How infuriating! This was the first time Cheng Hua had been so angry. On one hand, it was because he had almost been injured by the missile. On the other hand, it was because Yi Ji was lying on the cloud-piercing shuttle and laughing at him. Cheng Hua could not tolerate losing face in front of Yi Ji, so he immediately flew out from the ruins of the shop. Then, he suddenly pulled out a 3-foot-long sword box from his sleeve and threw it into the air. Speaking of which, it was strange. After this sword box was thrown into the air by Cheng Hua, it actually floated quietly in the air. When the battle command saw that Cheng Hua flew into the air again as if nothing had happened, they decisively ordered the soldiers to launch another attack. This time, the American army was not trying to test the waters, so they launched a round of artillery fire. In an instant, countless poisonous stingers, battle axes, bumblebees, and other sophisticated missiles that were made with a lot of money were crazily thrown at the town where Cheng Hua was. Seeing this, Cheng Hua had a murderous look in his eyes. He could not help but grit his teeth and shouted coldly, "You're asking for death." Before he finished speaking, the sword box that Cheng Hua had thrown into the air before seemed to have received some instructions. A secret door suddenly opened on the top of the box, and then countless small metal swords suddenly shot out from it. These small metal swords were like a school of fish at the bottom of the sea. After they came out of the sword box, the small metal swords started to swim flexibly in the air. Although the missile's flying speed was fast, the small metal swords were obviously faster. Bang! 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 It was accompanied by a series of explosions. The American army's round of artillery fire was actually blocked by the small metal swords just like that. At that moment, almost everyone in the battle command at the back was shocked by this strange scene. Is this the strength of a Super X level? Is this still a human? After the small metal swords intercepted the missiles in the sky, they did not stop because of this. Instead, they continued to fly toward the location where the American army was. These small metal swords were only about 10 centimeters long. Logically speaking, the sword box should not be able to hold many of them. However, what was strange was, from the moment Cheng Hua activated the sword box, there was an endless stream of small metal swords flying out of it, and they did not stop for even a moment. Therefore, in just a short while, the sky of the town was even covered by the small metal swords released from the sword box. The densely packed small metal swords rushed toward the location where the American army was like a swarm of locusts passing through. When had the ordinary soldiers ever seen such a strange scene? Therefore, they were frightened by the overwhelming number of small metal swords on the spot, and they fired their guns randomly. The muzzles of the guns spat out tongues of fire crazily. The bullets hit the small metal swords, and instantly there was a series of ding ding dang dang sounds of metal colliding. However, it was a pity, in the end, these actions were futile. The small metal swords quickly rushed into the American army's armored battle group. It did not matter whether it was the drivers hiding in the armored vehicles or the fully armed soldiers. In front of the small metal swords, human lives were as cheap as grass. A light cut would instantly cause a large number of them to fall. In less than 5 minutes, this rapid reaction force of 3,000 people had been completely wiped off the face of the earth by Cheng Hua. Fresh blood stained the ground red. The vast grassland that was bustling with noise and excitement earlier seemed to have turned into a mass grave 10 miles away at that moment. Even from afar, one could smell the thick stench of blood in the air. Such indiscriminate killing, Cheng Hua, I'm afraid you're going to suffer retribution in the future. Yi Ji looked at the battlefield below and could not help but frown deeply. He really did not expect that Cheng Hua was actually so vicious and merciless. Looking at the situation, Cheng Hua did not seem to treat these golden-haired natives as humans at all. The scene had already been broadcasted through the satellite and was clearly presented on the big screen of the battle command at the rear. At this moment, the entire battle command was silent. Almost everyone was stunned by the tragic and bloody scene in front of them. Nuclear bomb. Request to use nuclear bomb. After coming back to his senses, the supreme commander of this battle seemed to have gone mad as he frantically requested the military headquarters to use nuclear bomb. However, what no one expected was, the military headquarters actually rejected his request very decisively. The Yellowstone Park supervolcano is in an active period. Once the nuclear bomb is used, it is very likely to cause the supervolcano to erupt accidentally. The moment he heard this reason, the colonel despaired. However, what he did not know was, when the military headquarters rejected his use of nuclear bomb, they also submitted another request to the White House. The use of nuclear bomb is restricted. The military situation is urgent. Please inform Hua Xia and ask Wu Lian to urgently dispatch X-level military support to us. Chapter 459. From the day the Declaration of Independence was issued, the United States had only been established for 200 years. Therefore, even if the United States was very powerful today, it was inevitable that people would call it a country without a history. This was the so-called heritage. It was also the only thing the United States lacked today. Therefore, after confirming that nuclear bombs could not be used, the military staff decisively turned their attention to Hua Xia on the other side of the ocean. Unlike the United States' pale historical heritage, Hua Xia had countless talented people since ancient times. Although most of these people were wild cranes, they had always liked to drift with the wind and call the world their home. But this was not a big problem, because the international Wu Lian had been established. In the end, Hua Xia was still a country that paid attention to human relationships. Even if they were wild cranes, they still had to have their own home, right? Just like when Wang Chuanjiu found out that Chen Shi was a cultivator, she would always invite Chen Shi to join for various reasons. This was a very good virtuous cycle. With the support of the country as the foundation, the power of the country gathered the scattered heritages of the people together, and at the same time, these talented people had the opportunity to interact with each other. Just like universities, as long as there were the best teachers in the world, it would naturally attract more and more cultivators to voluntarily join. Therefore, from the moment the Wu Lian was born, its strength continued to grow, and now it had already become the most powerful cultivator organization in the world. Hua Xia called them cultivators, while the United States called them superpowered people. The United States lacked the corresponding heritage, so naturally, they could not establish a superpowered organization like the Wu Lian. And this was the fundamental reason why the United States vigorously developed exoskeleton armor in recent years. The individual ability of a cultivator was extremely outstanding. Even if it was a single person, it might not be a problem for them to fight against a platoon, a regiment, or even a brigade, but what if they had to fight against an entire country? It should be known that the annual military expenditure of the United States was as high as $700 billion, which was equivalent to half of the total military expenditure of all countries in the world. If the United States were really forced into a corner and threw missiles like scattering flowers, how many could Cheng Hua successfully intercept? 1,000? 10,000? Or 100,000? The true essence in his body was limited. Once the true essence in his body was exhausted, what would Cheng Hua use to resist the continuous bombardment of the army? Of course, the premise was that Cheng Hua wouldn't escape on the cloud-piercing shuttle. Therefore, the United States was not considering whether or not they could take down Cheng Hua. Instead, they were considering the price they would have to pay to take down Cheng Hua. If he really wanted to take Cheng Hua by force, let's not talk about whether he could successfully take him down. Once the war started, the United States would definitely suffer a lot of economic losses. Don't damaged tanks need to be repaired? Doesn't a destroyed town need to be repaired? Don't the people who have been affected by the war need the state to step in and provide subsidies? Behind each bullet was a brand new US dollar bill. Behind every soldier who died in battle, there was also a thick stack of compensation money. This was all money. Did they really think that the United States wouldn't know how to settle scores? It wasn't that they didn't know what to do with Cheng Hua. They just wanted to solve this problem in a simpler way. Cheng Hua wasn't a grinning alien. At first glance, they could basically confirm that he was from Hua Xia. Since he was an esper from Hua Xia, then naturally, Hua Xia should step in and take him away. The decision made by the military actually meant that they had given up on this great opportunity to capture an X-level esper alive. Thinking about it carefully, it really did hurt a little. Cheng Hua didn't know what the United States were thinking. After destroying this rapid response team, he put away the sword case and leisurely returned to the small town's market. He wasn't in a hurry. After beating up the naughty kid, wouldn't it give him time to go back and find his father? Thus, he began to wander around the market without a care in the world. There was a convenience store in the market. Cheng Hua picked up a piece of chocolate and tore open the packaging. After thinking that it was some kind of food, he decisively put it into his mouth. What is this? Why is it so delicious? E.g. I found something good. Come down and try it. In the Tai Wei enclosure, where industrial development was almost non-existent, there were no such delicious snacks. Therefore, this bite also completely opened the door to a new world for Chung Hua. French fries, biscuits, candy, cheese, beef, ice cream. The convenience store wasn't big, but it had everything. Chung Hua ate enthusiastically, but he didn't forget to ask his companions to come down and eat together. This was a major victory for technological civilization. Even if it was a treasure of heaven and earth, it couldn't compare to the small piece of chocolate in Chung Hua's hand. As a result, the two youths from outer space were completely captivated by the temptation of junk food. The drone sent by the military had been secretly monitoring the two of them. Chung Hua had already noticed the presence of the drone. However, while chewing gum, he swaggered into a nearby bar without any intention of shooting it down. He was waiting. The United States was also waiting. Time slowly passed by. 2 hours later, a supersonic fighter from Huaxia finally landed at Yellowstone Airport. This was the first time Wu Lian was invited to perform a mission in the United States, so Huaxia attached great importance to this mission. The United States was tens of thousands of kilometers away from Huaxia. If it weren't for the cooperation of the two countries that provided several air refueling services for the fighter within their own jurisdiction, this supersonic fighter wouldn't have been able to arrive at Yellowstone Park in just 2 hours. The mission difficulty was X. Only success was allowed, failure was not allowed. The person in charge of receiving Huaxia's personnel was the colonel from before. He was now reduced to a commander without an army, so when he heard that Huaxia sent support, an undisguised anger appeared on the colonel's face. Instead of finding a way to solve their own problems, they actually went to the enemy country for help. The colonel was very dissatisfied with the military's arrangement, but due to the orders of his superiors, he had to personally come to greet them. But soon, the dissatisfaction on the colonel's face turned into shock. The military rejected his application for a nuclear bomb, and the last solution they came up with, they actually invited a woman from Huaxia for support. A woman? A woman? This was a very beautiful and cold woman. Even though the colonel was used to seeing beauties from different countries, at this moment, he couldn't help but feel stunned. The colonel was slightly distracted. The woman had long been used to his loss of composure. Therefore, after a trace of disgust flashed in her eyes, she coldly said, "Where are they?" She spoke the most standard American English. After the colonel heard this, he suddenly seemed to come back to his senses and quickly extended his hand to invite the woman to the Battle Command Center for a detailed discussion. Based on this situation, this woman should be the person in charge of Huaxia. Reinforcements should still be on the way. The colonel pondered and couldn't help but look up and down at the woman. But what he didn't expect was, the woman actually rejected his invitation without any hesitation. No need. After speaking, the woman flew up into the air in front of everyone, and then flew straight to the location of the town. Like a comet, the woman's figure quickly disappeared into the horizon. At this moment, the colonel couldn't help but open his mouth wide. He looked in the direction that the woman disappeared and couldn't help but mutter, "Oh, my God. She's Superwoman." Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book Mobile Version Website, .com. Chapter 460. There was no doubt about it. This extremely beautiful and cold woman who came all the way from Huaxia was obviously Qin Shueching, who had just woken up from her coma a few days ago. With such a beautiful and capable daughter, Wang Chuanju and Qin Yongwang really benefited a lot from her. As a result, the couple's status in the Wu Lian had been rising steadily in recent years. Qin Shueching was in charge of external affairs, while Qin Yongwang and his wife were in charge of internal affairs. The family had become a giant within the Wu Lian. And this was without taking into account the mysterious foreign aid, Mr. Chen. Huaxia attached great importance to the United States' request for help this time, so after the Wu Lian received the news, they immediately began to strictly select the candidates for the battle. Qin Shueqing was not the only X level in the Wu Yan, nor was she the strongest X level. However, she was the only X level who took the initiative to apply for the battle. No one knew if Qin Shueqing had eaten gunpowder recently, but after returning to the headquarters in Shangjing, she had a cold face all day long. In addition, she had disappeared for more than a year, so when she came back this time, not many people dared to talk to her. Perhaps it was because of some kind of violence gene hidden in her bones, so after she saw the battle video from the United States, this woman who looked forward to going on a mission all day suddenly couldn't sit still. Before the higher-ups even made a formal decision, Qin Shueqing had already gone to the airport to prepare for departure. Not everyone was as violent as her, and not everyone liked to use war to support war. Since Qin Shueqing wanted to do this kind of thankless task, no one would jump out to compete with her. So, Qin Shueqing set off. Although the enemy in the battle video looked to be only 15 or 16 years old, Qin Shueqing didn't underestimate the enemy at all. Instead, she adjusted her state of mind along the way, hoping to be in the best state to face this mysterious celestial being. This was also the first time she had officially fought someone since breaking through to the celestial being level. Qin Shueqing soon arrived above the town that the colonel had mentioned. Her arrival naturally alarmed the two youths who were drinking in the town's bar. Then, with a beer bottle in one hand and a chocolate in the other, Cheng-Hua swaggered out of the bar. As soon as he stepped out of the bar, Cheng-Hua saw this strange woman with a cold and arrogant face. Qin Shueqing quietly floated above the market. Cheng-Hua stood casually at the entrance of the bar. He raised his head slightly and looked at her. Cheng-Hua sized up the woman in front of him. Qin Shueqing was also sizing up the young man in front of him. The two stared at each other for a few seconds before Cheng-Hua seemed to have thought of something. He couldn't help but grin, and then greeted her in the broken English he had just learned, "Hello?" Hearing this, Qin Shueqing didn't immediately reply. Instead, she frowned slightly. Perhaps it was because she had lived in the same courtyard as Qin Shi for a long time, but Qin Shueqing's perception of true essence was slightly better than other cultivators of the same level. Although this young man in front of her was young, his true essence fluctuations were definitely something that only X-level cultivators could have. X-level, which was the level above the celestial being level. At the same time, it was also known as Golden Core level. Yi followed Cheng-Hua out of the bar. At this moment, a trace of seriousness appeared on Qin Wanqing's face. Two people. There was clearly something wrong with the information provided by the United States. Yi had always been cautious. Even after leaving the cloud-piercing shuttle, he didn't remove the aura concealment technique on his body. Thus, the drone didn't discover his existence at all. Although Qin Shueqing had a strong personality, she wasn't a reckless person. The two young men in front of her had a similar level of cultivation as her. If she had known that this would happen, she would have brought more people with her. However, it was too late to say anything now. The enemy was right in front of her. Running away before the battle was not Qin Shueqing's style. Thus, after hesitating for a moment, she asked coldly, "Where are the two of you from? Who are you from? Why are you causing trouble here today?" Qin Shueqing thought that the two of them were the disciples of some hidden expert. Thus, she didn't hold back. The moment she stepped forward, she acted as if she was going to interrogate them for their crimes. Seeing this, Cheng-Hua didn't immediately reply. Instead, he secretly used his divine consciousness to discuss with Yi. "This woman's cultivation level seems to be about the same as ours. If that's the case, the inheritance of the Tian Shu ruins shouldn't have been lost." The two of them silently discussed. Qin Shueqing's appearance also successfully stopped the two of them from continuing to act presumptuously. Since the Tian Shu ruins still had the inheritance of immortal cultivators, they urgently needed to confirm a question. That was, what exactly was the cultivation level of this woman in front of them considered in the Tian Shu ruins? If she was just a small fry, then there must be a very powerful sect behind her. Under such circumstances, the two of them could only give up the opportunity to get the first prize and return to the Supreme Palace enclosure to seek help. However, if the cultivation level of this woman in front of them was considered to be one of the best in the Tian Shu ruins, didn't that mean that the Tian Shu ruins were already in their pockets? The two of them had the cloud-piercing shuttle in their hands. It could be said that they could attack or retreat as they wished. Therefore, after a short discussion, even the usually conservative Yi Ji had the intention of directly taking this woman down. The two of them were still young and had been cultivating in seclusion. Naturally, they didn't understand the beauty of women, let alone what it meant to have tender feelings for the fairer sex. Thus, after the two of them exchanged a look, they suddenly rushed toward Qin Shueqing. "Let's take her down first." "Let's do that." Qin Shueqing had been waiting for them all this time. After seeing the strange expressions of the two of them, she directly raised her essence, energy, and spirit to the peak. Therefore, the moment the two of them moved, Qin Shueqing's movements were actually slightly faster than theirs. Before receiving guidance from Qin Shi, Qin Shueqing was already a grandmaster in the gang state. Therefore, she could be said to have entered the Tao through martial arts. Martial artists mainly focused on close combat, while necromancers were more proficient in long-range combat using the 5 elements Dharma. Qin Shueqing had been practicing martial arts all her life. Walking, sitting, and lying down were the principles of martial arts. And as she stepped into the realm of oneness of heaven and man, after converting all the vital qi in her body into vital essence, her combat power increased exponentially. It was fine if she didn't move, but once she moved, it was like a thunderbolt breaking through bamboo. Qin Shueqing's figure was slender and graceful. However, when she moved, she was like a fierce tiger coming down from the mountain, instantly setting off a strong and unparalleled momentum. Immortal cultivators were beyond the scope of ordinary people, so it was rare for them to fight in close combat. This could be seen from the situation when Qin Shi fought with others before. Cheng Hua had fought with others many times, but he had never encountered such a way of fighting that focused on close combat. Therefore, when he saw Qin Shueqing pouncing in front of him, Cheng Hua was stunned. This woman doesn't play by the rules. However, in the time it took for him to be distracted, Qin Shueqing directly condensed all the vital essence in her body into her hand, and then slammed it hard on Cheng Hua's protective qi in front of his chest. Bang! The moment the vital essence collided, a strong wind suddenly blew over the market, smashing all the houses on the side. Please remember the domain name of this book, 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version website. Chapter 461. How ferocious would a battle between Golden Core stage cultivators be? Qin Shueqing didn't have any magic treasures. Her hands and feet were her most powerful weapons. Although Qin Shi had taught her some pretty good techniques, Qin Shueqing didn't have any intention of learning more about them. She was a martial Dao grandmaster. Even though she had become a diviner, Qin Shueqing was still constantly tempering her martial arts attainments. The highest realm of martial arts was oneness of heaven and man. Oneness of heaven and man was the end of the martial Dao. Qin Shueqing had already reached the end. There was no road ahead. If there was still a path ahead of them, then, this path was obviously the immortal road. Qin Shi had already taught Qin Shueqing the cultivation method. However, due to Qin Shueqing's cold and arrogant temperament, Qin Shi rarely gave her guidance. He would only check on her situation from time to time. As long as there weren't any major problems, Qin Shi didn't bother to stick his hot face to her cold butt. Qin Shi hadn't carefully studied his sister-in-law's situation, so he hadn't discovered it. Qin Shueqing had actually already walked on a different road. The sea was boundless, the sky was the shore, and the mountain was the peak. Immortal cultivation methods were indeed very powerful. There was a world of difference between them and mortal martial arts. However, until today, Qin Shueqing was still very stubborn. She still believed that the martial Dao she had been pursuing all her life had no end. She was a martial Dao grandmaster. After achieving oneness of heaven and man, she was still constantly polishing her martial arts attainments through immortal cultivation methods. Since there was no road ahead, she would walk on a brand new road. Cultivators focused on the cultivation of the soul. Qin Shueqing wanted to do the opposite and focus on the cultivation of the physical body. With this unique cultivation method, who knew what she could do in the future? The reason why she could easily flatten her was that the gap between their realms was too big. If the two of them were put on the same level, would this brother-in-law be able to beat his sister-in-law? This has become a big problem. She had never seriously fought with Qin Shueqing, and Qin Shueqing had never seriously fought with a cultivator of the same realm. Therefore, after seeing Cheng Hua make a slight move, Qin Shueqing immediately used all of her strength. Like a fierce tiger pouncing on its prey, she viciously pounced on Cheng Hua. Like a scholar encountering a soldier, Qin Shueqing's gorgeous and smooth series of attacks stunned Cheng Hua on the spot. He wanted to counterattack, but Qin Shueqing's hands always easily bypassed his defense and easily hit his protective shield. Cultivators rarely experienced such a tangled fight. If it weren't for the fact that Cheng Hua had a defensive magic treasure on him, which reduced the majority of Qin Shueqing's strength, Cheng Hua would have been slapped into the ground by Qin Shueqing. Cheng Hua. Yi Ji watched anxiously from the side. He wanted to help, but the two of them were too close. He was afraid that he would accidentally hurt his companion, so Yi Ji didn't dare to rashly make a move. However, Cheng Hua wasn't stupid. After dozens of palms, he finally found a gap. At the cost of taking a palm from Qin Shueqing, he successfully shook off Qin Shueqing's entanglement. This time, Cheng Hua finally learned to be smart. When he saw that Qin Shueqing still wanted to go forward, he darted back to Yi Ji's side and hurriedly took out his sword case from his summer mustard seed bag. Cheng Hua, be careful. This woman's technique is very strange. It seems like she likes to fight in close quarters. As he said that, Yi Ji also took out his magic treasure. Hearing that, Cheng Hua's face was full of anger and hatred as he said, I know. I almost fell into her trap just now. Don't interfere first. Let me deal with her. Cheng Hua's magic treasure was the sword case in his hand. The case was 3 feet long and yellow all over. The tail was inlaid with a group of charred black ornaments, so it was called Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail. It was a 9th grade spirit treasure and was really rare. Once the Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail case was in his hand, the battle flames in Cheng Hua's heart immediately burned fiercely. Don't look at how Qin Shueqing's palm technique made him unable to fight back at all. In reality, Cheng Hua didn't suffer any substantial damage at all. After all, Qin Shueqing's current moves were figured out by herself. Now that she was still at the stage of deliberation, how powerful could they be? It was like a boorish man with nothing but brute strength. So even if Qin Shueqing had an extraordinary accumulation of vital essence, she still couldn't fully utilize the power of this vital essence. After a bout of fruitless fighting, Qin Shueqing clearly understood her disadvantage. Therefore, she didn't want to give Cheng Hua any chance to catch his breath and directly rushed over again. But this time, Cheng Hua, who was already prepared, directly threw out the sword case in his hand. Different from Chen Shi's all swords in one, the small metal swords in the Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail case were all real objects. Each of the small metal swords could freely attack under the guidance of Cheng Hua's divine telekinesis. The sword case was the mother sword, and the small swords were the child swords. The child swords were kept in the mother sword and constantly nourished, while the small swords were infinite. And this was the so-called hidden swords in the case. Of course, with Cheng Hua's current cultivation, he actually couldn't control all the child swords in the sword case as he wished. But this was already enough. Attack! At Cheng Hua's command, countless small metal swords instantly flew out of the Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail case. These small swords were like crows, covering half the sky the moment they appeared. Seeing this, Qin Shueqing was calm and unafraid. Although she didn't have any Dharma treasures, her martial intent was already above that of ordinary Dharma treasures. Afraid before the battle? Impossible. Forever impossible. If she was afraid, then she wouldn't be her. Qin Shueqing poured all the vital essence in her body into her limbs and bones, and her body instantly became as hard as iron. Her joints moved, and her whole body immediately emitted bursts of thunder. And this was the performance of martial arts cultivation at the peak, bones and tendons piercing, tiger leopard thunder. And as Qin Shueqing punched out, an ear-piercing sound suddenly rang in the air. Streams of vital essence visible to the naked eye were like tornadoes, instantly knocking away all the small metal swords in front of her. Facing the sky full of sword rain, Qin Shueqing angrily went against the flow. At this moment, she was like an unsheathed sword. She actually tore a crack in the sky full of sword rain. Humph. Still barehanded at this time, are you here to die? Seeing that she still didn't take out her Dharma treasures under such circumstances, Cheng Hua instantly made a judgment in his heart. Tianshu ruins, as expected, it still declined. The woman in front of him with a decent cultivation but an ordinary cultivation method was probably the only powerhouse in the Tianshu ruins that could be taken out? Otherwise, how could she not be able to take out even a suitable magical artifact? Thinking of this, Cheng Hua couldn't help but have a fierce look in his eyes. He immediately clasped his hands in front of his chest, and then quickly formed a hand seal. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 462. At that moment, thousands of small swords seemed to have turned into a huge dragon made of metal blades. Countless sharp blades shone with cold light under the sun. The densely packed small metal swords covered most of the sky. Under Cheng Hua's command, these small metal swords were like obedient fish. They gathered together, and the tip of the sword was pointed at Qin Wanqing, who was charging towards him at high speed. Seeing the flying swords like rain, Qin Shueqing was not afraid at all. She brazenly faced them with her bare hands. Warriors did not need weapons because their bodies were the most powerful weapons. Qin Shueqing infused her vital essence into her limbs and bones, so that a layer of faint light appeared on her originally slightly white skin. From a distance, she was like a bodhisattva carefully carved out of cold jade. It was exactly like the old saying in books, skin of ice, bones of jade, makeup of jade. Do not fear the angry eyes of the bodhisattva. Although Qin Shueqing's momentum was strong. But it was a pity that her exploration of martial arts was still at the beginning stage. Now, with only her mortal body, how could she resist Cheng Hua's phoenix perch scorched tail box? Countless small metal swords kept hitting Qin Shueqing's protective shield. At first, Qin Wanqing could still rely on the quintessential essence in her body to repel the small swords. However, as wave after wave of flying swords continued to attack, Qin Wanqing's protective shield couldn't help but begin to weaken. Soon, a small metal sword successfully pierced through her protective shield. Qin Shueqing could not dodge in time. This small sword immediately left a shallow wound on her face. This was just the beginning. As soon as the protective shield was broken, the small metal swords swarmed up like crazy bees. Seeing this, Qin Shueqing decisively abandoned her own defense. At the price of sacrificing the protective shield, she instantly increased her speed by a lot. Of course. The result of this was obvious. Countless small wounds suddenly appeared on Qin Shueqing's body. Cheng Hua had been deliberately keeping a distance from Qin Shueqing. Every time Qin Shueqing took a step forward, he would decisively take a step back. Seeing Qin Shueqing suddenly accelerate, Cheng Hua didn't react in time, and Qin Shueqing successfully closed in on him. Bitch, do you really think I'm afraid of you? Cheng Hua was also quite experienced in facing enemies. Seeing that Qin Shueqing was too strong, he didn't panic at all. A fierce look flashed in his eyes, and then he suddenly pulled out a 3-feet-long sword from the phoenix perch scorched tail case. This was the primordial sword, and also one of the most important parts of the phoenix perch scorched tail case. Very few people knew about the existence of the primordial sword. Ever since Cheng Hua obtained the phoenix perch scorched tail box, he had been using it as a killing move. Cheng Hua had always been arrogant because of his talent, and his heart was higher than the sky. How could he tolerate Qin Wanqing chasing after him like a dog? Today, he was also forced into a corner by Qin Shueqing. Therefore, Cheng Hua no longer retreated. After pulling out the primordial sword, he slashed at Qin Shueqing, who was swinging her palm at him. In the rain of swords, Qin Shueqing was about to attack. Cheng Hua pulled out his sword to meet her. Bam! With a loud sound, the vital essence caused by the collision of the two instantly tore the small town below into ruins. E.G. nervously waited at the side, so he clearly saw the entire process of the two fighting. Therefore, as soon as the two separated, E.G. hurriedly rushed to Chenghua's side. "Chenghua, are you okay?" "I'm fine." Chenghua gloomily wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said coldly, "I almost fell into this B***TCH's trap again." In the moment when they exchanged blows, Qin Shueqing suddenly changed her move. Her left hand pressed against the long sword and her palm hit the spine of the sword, trying to knock the long sword out of Chenghua's hand. At the same time, she immediately raised her other hand and slapped Chenghua's chest. Chonghua had taken the full brunt of this palm, so even now, he could still feel his blood and qi churning in his body. "It's nothing serious, don't worry." E.G. wanted to heal Chonghua, but Chonghua shook his head and refused. Then, he lowered his head to look at the ruins below. That D***MNB***TCH, wasn't she lying in the ruins of the small town, covered in blood? Although she had successfully injured Chonghua with her reckless fighting style, she had also paid a heavy price for it. Speaking of which, Qin Shueqing was once again at a disadvantage because she didn't have a magic treasure. She hadn't expected, Chenghua's true killing move wasn't the twin sword in his hand, but the phoenix perch scorched tail box beside him. The phoenix perch scorched tail box was refined by a Dongshu cultivator. It didn't look big, but it contained nearly 10,000 small metal swords. With Chenghua's cultivation, he could only use a third of them. The rest of the sub-swords were all hidden in the sword box. Although Chonghua couldn't control the remaining sub-swords normally, he could still detonate the phoenix perch scorched tail box and release all the sub-swords in the box in an instant. Just like the principle of a fragmentation grenade, once the phoenix perch scorched tail box exploded, it would not only set off a powerful shockwave, but also release countless sub-swords to increase the destructive power of the explosion. A 9th-grade spirit treasure could explode just like that. Chonghua had really put in a lot of effort this time. But then again, a 9th-grade spirit treasure in exchange for the life of a golden core cultivator. This seemed to be a good deal. Division Chief Qin? Division Chief Qin? Are you okay? Please answer. Please answer. Whether it was Xia or the United States, the satellites of the two countries had been monitoring the small town from afar. But because Chonghua and Qin Shueqing both had vital essence protecting their bodies, the satellites couldn't directly capture the situation of their battle. Now that the battle was over, Qin Shueqing's figure finally appeared on the surveillance satellite. The keyhole satellites of the United States had reached a resolution of 0.05 meters. They could basically see license plates directly, so the moment Qin Shueqing appeared, the surveillance satellite immediately locked onto her. However, the moment she saw the big screen, Wang Chuanju was stunned. She saw Qin Shueqing lying in the ruins, covered in blood. Her clothes were stained with blood, and at the same time, her face was also blurred. She just lay quietly in the ruins of the small town. She didn't move at all. No one knew whether she was dead or alive. Qin Shueqing? At that moment, Wang Chuanju felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She couldn't even stand properly. If it weren't for the staff members' quick reflexes, this famous Iron Lady would have fallen to the ground on the spot. Qin Shueqing had lost. This news seemed to have grown wings. It didn't take long for the news to spread all over the Wu Yan. Wang Chuanju sat on the chair with a dull look in her eyes. Although she liked power, she wasn't the kind of ruthless person who would abandon her family for power. Qin Shueqing had only fought with her permission. Because she had confidence in her daughter. Who would have thought the result would be like this? At that moment, Wang Chuanju's heart was dead. "Leader, why don't you rest for a while? The higher-ups have already sent reinforcements. The 3 big shots are moving together. They should be able to make it. Director Qin is strong. Even if she's injured, it's not a big deal. You don't know the exact situation here, so don't worry too much. We have to have confidence in Director Qin," the staff carefully comforted Wang Chuanju. However, Wang Chuanju seemed to have lost her soul. She stared at the screen without moving. After a long while, she seemed to have suddenly thought of something. She actually jumped up from the chair excitedly. The staff at the side was shocked by Wang Chuanju's actions. He was about to go up and comfort her when Wang Chuanju pushed him away. Then, she quickly took out her phone from the cabinet. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book House. Chapter 463. These few days, Chen Shi's life was quite fulfilling. In addition to taking care of the little girl's daily life, he also had to be careful not to let his wife get lost. Speaking of which, Qin Ruoying was really like an old person with Alzheimer's. She didn't talk much. Every day, after sending the little girl to school with Chen Shi, she would wander aimlessly on the streets. No matter how Chen Shi tried to strike up a conversation with her, Qin Ruoying didn't care at all. They used to be very close, but now they were gradually drifting apart. Of course, these seemingly estranged situations were, in fact, only superficial. In fact, every time when the little girl was out of school, Chen Shi only had to say that Nian Nian was out of school, and Qin Ruoying would immediately stop and look back at him silently. At this time, Chen Shi would immediately call for a taxi, and then the couple would take a taxi back to school to pick up the little girl. Day after day, the cycle repeated itself. Although Chen Shi was still a little worried about Qin Ruoying's situation, he didn't panic because of this. Anyway, the soul mirror was in his hands, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was imprisoned in Saturn Ring by him. They had been separated for too long, and now that they were finally reunited, how could Chen Shi leave so easily? In addition, the soul mirror seemed to have run out of energy recently. No matter how he tried, the soul mirror didn't respond. Therefore, Chen Shi planned to wait for a while until his life gradually stabilized, then he would find time to return to Saturn Ring to have a good chat with Yuhuan Tianzuan. At that time, wouldn't Yingying's situation be solved? But then again, after returning home this time, Chen Shi obviously felt that his life was a little different from before. The reason was the little girl. Nian Nian was more than 6 years old. Generally, from this time onwards, the burden on the shoulders of the parents would become a lot lighter. After all, the child spent half of her time in school every day. The school shared a portion of the responsibility for the parents, so the parents naturally didn't have to work as hard as before. At this stage, the child's academic performance and performance in school would become the main concern of every parent. And what was Nian Nian's greatest strength? Wasn't she smart and sensible? Whenever the school arranged an exam, the little guy's results would always be the first in his grade. As for her performance in school, there was no need to mention it. Some time ago, at the request of the school, the teacher gave each child in the class an application form for joining the Young Pioneers. After Nian Nian submitted her application, the school quickly approved it. Because they were still in the first grade, there were only 10 places in each class. With Nian Nian's usual performance, there was naturally no problem for her to enter the first batch. Therefore, as the class monitor, she led her classmates to stand under the national flag and made a declaration to join the team. At the same time, she stood on the podium with the same batch of young pioneers and sang the Young Pioneer song. We are the successors of communism. Inherit the glorious tradition of our revolutionary forefathers. Love the motherland, love the people. A bright red scarf fluttering in front of our chests. Needless to say, from then on, the way her classmates looked at her was a little different. Perhaps it was because Nian Nian had hit someone when she first entered the school, so the children in the class were a little afraid of her. After she became a young pioneer and wore a bright red scarf, her classmates were no longer so afraid of her. Instead, they became very respectful of her. Although she was the class monitor, she never tattled to the teacher. Because, even the most mischievous of classmates didn't dare to jump in front of her. Nian Nian almost became the leader of the class. Whenever her classmates went overboard during class or made loud noises during self-study, she only needed to glare fiercely at them, and the students she stared at would instantly wilt like eggplants that had been hit by frost. All of these behaviors were seen by the teacher. Who didn't like outstanding children? Although Nian Nian was only a first-grade student, by the time she reached the second grade, the title of Three Good Students was basically guaranteed. Nyan was so worry-free, so Chinshi naturally didn't have to worry too much. Therefore, as the child grew up day by day, he, as the father, became more and more free. On this day, Chinshi sent Nyan to school as usual. When he was about to leave, he happened to meet Nyan's class teacher. The teacher pulled him aside and praised him, which almost made Chinshi burst out laughing. "Ying, did you hear that? Every teacher is praising our Nyan. This child is really becoming more and more sensible." After parting with the teacher, Chinshi was still very proud of himself. Qin Ruoying walked quickly in front, and he bragged about his daughter's excellence behind her. There was a detail here that was worth noting. In the past, Chinshi could only hang about 10 meters behind Qin Ruoying. He didn't expect that after a few days, he would be able to stick to Qin Ruoying's 2 to 3 meters behind her. Qin Ruoying's attitude towards him didn't seem to change much, but the distance between the two was constantly closing. Therefore, he successfully climbed onto Ying's bed. This became Chinshi's main goal at the moment. In order to achieve this goal as soon as possible, Chinshi worked hard. And the little sweetness that constantly emerged in the process of this struggle was really not worth mentioning to outsiders. "Ying, you went to Dongzaiman yesterday. Hey, that's Pan Garden, you've been there too. Look, you've already walked around this ring. Why don't I'll take you to the Summer Palace today, okay? That place used to be a royal garden. There are mountains and rivers, and there's a lot of vegetation. It's much better than this reinforced concrete." Qin Ruoying didn't speak the whole time. No matter how Chinshi tried to talk to her, she acted as if she didn't hear him. However, when Chinshi gave her directions, Qin Ruoying reacted, so she didn't continue to walk down Chang'an Avenue. Qin Ruoying stopped walking, as if she was thinking about where she should go now. Seeing this, Chinshi suddenly thought of something and quickly added, "Oh yeah, I've taken Nyan there before. She really likes it there, so I guess you'll like it too." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying turned around and looked at him. She seemed to be moved by Chinshi's suggestion, so for the first time ever, she said, "Let's go." "Okay." Chinshi was overjoyed. He quickly waved his hand to hail a taxi, then he helped Qin Ruoying into the car. However, just as he was excitedly introducing Summer Palace to Qin Ruoying, an ear-piercing ringtone suddenly rang. "Hey, Ying, hold on, I need to take this call." Chinshi picked up the phone, but there was no number displayed on it. He hesitated for a moment, then considering that he usually didn't receive any harassing calls, the caller should be someone he knew, so he finally pressed the answer button. "Hello? Who is this?" "Chinshi. It's me. Second aunt." As soon as the call connected, Wang Chuanju's slightly anxious voice sounded from the other end of the phone. When Chinshi heard the sobbing tone in her voice, she immediately frowned and asked, "Auntie? What's wrong? Did something happen?" Qin was injured by someone. Those people might even take her life. "Second aunt, I beg you, please save Qin. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com, Wonderful Book House. Com. Chapter 464. Something happened to Qin. The moment she heard this, even Chinshi couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. His sister-in-law had only left home for a few days. How could something have happened to her? Chinshi was well aware of Qin Shueqing's abilities. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if his sister-in-law met Jiang Yan, she could still barely last 2 or 3 moves against him. Although his sister-in-law was no match for Jiang Yan, if Jiang Yan really wanted to take her down, he would still have to put in a lot of effort. After all, Qin Shueqing was a cultivator at the Golden Core stage. If she couldn't beat him, wouldn't she know how to run? Could it be that her bad temper was acting up again? Why did he end up in such a hopeless situation because he had to compete with others? Wang Chuanju had always been strong. Now that she was calling Chinshi, her voice sounded like she was about to cry. So even if Chinshi used his butt to think, he could tell that the situation might be serious. Even if the entire Wu Lian family was mobilized, they probably wouldn't be able to solve this problem in a short period of time. His sister-in-law was family after all. She naturally couldn't refuse. Thus, he quickly replied, "Second aunt, don't worry. Send me the location. I'll rush over and see what's going on." Okay. After hanging up, Wang Chuanju immediately sent the location of the town to Shi's phone. At this moment, Shi seemed to suddenly remember something. He quickly said to Qin Ruoying, "Something happened to Qin. I have to go and see." Qin Ruoying glanced at him indifferently. She didn't seem to know who Qin was at all. Sigh. Seeing her cold expression, Shi could only shake his head and sigh. What should he do? Bring Ying with him? She probably wouldn't agree at all. But if he left Ying here alone, Shi would feel a little uncomfortable. He wasn't really afraid that Ying would get lost, but he was afraid that she would feel lonely. In such a big city like Shangjing, she was unfamiliar with the people and the place. Where could she go by herself? She was a little hesitant. Qin Ruoying seemed to have suddenly understood his difficulties. She suddenly said, "You go, I'll go by myself." Just 7 words. This was the longest sentence that Qin Ruoying had said to Shi during this period of time. Hearing this, Shi couldn't help but smile. After he quickly signaled the driver to stop by the side, he quietly left a restriction on Qin Ruoying. At the same time, he didn't forget to remind her, "Ying, don't run around. I'll come back to find you as soon as I'm done here. Nian gets out of school at 4 o'clock. We'll pick her up together. You know that kid's temper. If she doesn't see you after school, she'll definitely be angry with me again." She leaned on the car door and kept muttering. When the driver was a little impatient, he reluctantly got up and waved goodbye to Qin Ruoying. "Oh, right, Ying, I put a lot of cash in my bag. If you see anything you like, buy anything, don't save money, it's okay if you run out of cash. You have a payment app on your phone. There's money in it." The taxi gradually went away. She was still standing on the side of the road. He kept waving in the direction of the car. It was only a temporary separation, but he made it seem like a separation of life and death. This made the passers-by stunned. It wasn't until the car merged into the traffic and completely disappeared from his sight that she slowly retracted her arm and turned to walk into a side alley. At this time, Qin Ruoying, who had already left in the car, seemed to have just noticed the wallet that she deliberately put on the seat. She picked up the wallet and opened it. Good Lord, it was full of $100 bills. The wallet was stuffed to the brim. It was as if it was not filled with money at all, but with Shi's concern for her. "Girl, I can see that your husband is really good to you. It's rare to see a man as considerate as him these days. You two have children already, right? Uncle is experienced. Husband and wife quarrel at the head of the bed, but make up at the end. So, I'll take the liberty of advising you. It's about time you give him a way out. This man, although loosening and tightening can firmly tie his heart, you have to do it in moderation, right?" The driver was an old man. He had been secretly observing the two of them ever since they got on the car. According to his understanding, this must be a young couple having a conflict, so he smiled and put in a good word for Qin. Qin Ruoying sat in the back without saying anything. So the driver did not notice that a faint smile had already appeared on her lips. In the sky above the small town. After Changhua detonated the Phoenix Perch charred tail box to knock down Qin Shueching, he and Yi discussed how to deal with this woman. "Why don't we just kill her?" Although he succeeded in seriously injuring Qin Shueching, Changhua actually did not feel good. After all, he took a solid hit from that palm, so Qin Shueching's true essence kept wreaking havoc in his body. This true essence was extremely rich. Not only did it disrupt his breathing, but it also left some internal injuries in his body. It was a good thing that Qin Ruoying did not have a magic weapon. Otherwise, this palm would have directly hit his internal organs and caused him to be in pain. "No, we haven't figured out the details of the Tianshu ruins yet. We can't kill her so rashly." Yi reached out to stop Changhua. After thinking for a while, he frowned and continued, "The commotion just now was too big, and you're already injured. since the inheritance of the Tianshu ruins is still there, then we should do things more safely. Now that the enemy is in the dark and we are in the light, it's a big taboo for a military strategist. So let's take this woman and retreat first, find a place to wait for you to recover first. Yi's analysis was very reasonable. After hearing this, Changhua thought for a while, then nodded and replied, "Okay, I'll listen to you, but where should we go now?" "Where should we go?" His voice fell. Not only was Yi stunned, but even Changhua who said this was stunned. Because, the first "where should we go" was said by him. But the second "where should we go" was definitely not said by him. The two "where should we go" sounded almost at the same time. Changhua and Yi were stunned for a full 2 or 3 seconds, then they lowered their heads to look at the source of the sound. They saw a strange man suddenly appear in the ruins of the town. The man stood so casually beside Qin Shueching, but Changhua and Yi did not know when he came. "Who are you?" Changhua was shocked and subconsciously wanted to attack this man. But at this time, Yi pulled him behind him, then directly took out his life source magic weapon, the Tian Luo umbrella. Once the Tian Luo umbrella was taken out, it was like a cloud suddenly shrouded the ruins. The sky instantly darkened. Yi's expression was stern. Almost without any hesitation, he directly launched the fiercest attack on this man, and the first move was a killing move. Crown Cloud Shadow, Hidden Killing Intent. The Tian Luo umbrella expanded at the speed of the naked eye, then like a large net, from top to bottom, directly enveloped the man. Seeing this, the man chuckled coldly. "Didn't the teacher teach you? Children are disobedient, you'll get beaten up. This is too much. Once I start writing my daily routine, I say I'm water, then I'll have to trouble you big bosses. Next time you see someone leave a comment saying I'm only a cultivator and not a stay-at-home dad, help me explain properly. This is King Water. How am I going to write my daily routine? The above is all a joke. To be honest, I've greatly reduced the daily routine. Now I'm writing the main content. It's fine to say I'm water, but at least I'm writing with a purpose. In any case, it's more than 1,000,000 words. I can't just write a chapter over and over every day, right? But if I continue to cut it, then I really won't have a daily routine. After all, I can't have my cake and eat it too. This is all I can do. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book House. Chapter 465. This man who had appeared out of nowhere was obviously Chen Shi. Huaxia was about 12,000 kilometers away from the United States. It would take about 20 hours to get there by civilian airliner. That sounded very far away. But with Chen Shi's current level of cultivation, that distance was nothing. In his words, he could just walk out the door and take a turn to get there. The so-called true meaning of the word void included the concept of space. Therefore, it also made space jumping a method of travel that could be controlled by immortal cultivators. This was a qualitative change. It also marked that cultivators had officially stepped into the third stage from the second stage. And this third stage was understanding and using the laws of heaven and earth. Compared to Yi, Chenghua's reaction was much slower. Chen Shi had appeared right under their noses. Chenghua didn't understand the crux of the matter. Instead, he stared blankly at the person in front of him. "Chenghua, we can't stay here for long. I'll hold him back. You go and activate the cloud-piercing shuttle. Hurry." Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Yi immediately used his best move. At the same time, he pushed Chenghua far away. At this time, Chenghua seemed to have just woken up. He finally understood that the cultivation of the person in front of him was definitely far above theirs. Otherwise, how could they not have known when this person had arrived? The heavenly Luo umbrella covered the ruins of the town. From afar, it looked like a black umbrella had been placed on a pile of building models. This was an 8th grade spirit artifact, the heavenly Luo umbrella. Although the grade of this magic weapon was 1 grade lower than that of Xianghua's Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail box, its actual power was slightly stronger than that of the box. After all, it was a complete artifact. It wasn't a combined artifact like the phoenix perch charred tail box. Naturally, it was easier to use. Although the two of them usually bickered, the boat of friendship could capsize easily. When they were in real danger, Yi didn't hesitate at all. He immediately shielded Cheng Hua behind him and used all his strength to cover his retreat. This mysterious man in front of him was too scary. This was because Yi couldn't sense any trace of true chi fluctuations from him. What did this mean? This meant that this person's cultivation level had reached perfection. He wasn't someone the two of them could deal with. And this was clearly the true danger hidden in the Tianshu ruins. At that moment, many thoughts flashed through Yi's mind. He regretted not stopping Cheng Hua. But as soon as this thought appeared in his mind, Yi felt a black shadow flash in front of him. And then, his buttocks were ruthlessly kicked by someone. Who told you to be disobedient? Who told you to be unscrupulous? Since your parents didn't educate you properly, Uncle will educate you on behalf of your parents today. He was a golden core cultivator, but now he was like a child who had made a big mistake and was being punished by his parents. She kicked Yi far away. You? Yi was stunned. He endured the pain from his butt and looked down at the Tianluo umbrella. Then he pointed at Shi and exclaimed as if he had seen a ghost, "How did you escape?" Once the Tianluo umbrella was opened, nothing could escape. Right now, the heavenly Luo umbrella was perfectly fine above the ruins, but Shi suddenly appeared behind him like a ghost. How could Yi not be shocked? Qi refining, foundation establishment, golden core, yuanying, soul formation, dongshu. From golden core to dongshu, there were several big realms between. Therefore, in Shi's eyes, Cheng Hua and Yi were two naughty kids who hadn't even grown their hair yet. The two of them were not old, about 15 or 16 years old. Cultivators had the ability to slow down aging and retain their youth, but this was also based on a solid foundation of cultivation. Therefore, it was obvious that their background was not simple. In order to facilitate the interrogation later, Shi did not kill them directly. Instead, he used a more gentle way of physical punishment. But the young man was very proud. How could he be willing to endure such humiliation? When Shi kicked Yi's butt for the third time, Yi could not help but explode. Damn it! You deserve to die. With a loud shout, Yi, who had always been elegant and cautious, was now like a mad bull, fiercely charging at Shi. Yi's courage was commendable, but unfortunately, anger could not solve any problems. Seeing Yi's expression of wanting to eat him alive, Shi could not help but laugh coldly. Yi's speed, which he was so proud of, was as slow as a turtle in Shi's eyes. Therefore, when Yi aggressively rushed in front of Shi did not care what move he used. He raised his hand and slapped him. Pa! With one slap, Yi was slapped until the sky turned dark and he saw stars. Like a spinning top that was whipped, Yi quickly spun a few rounds in the air before falling heavily. Kid, Uncle will give you a word of advice today. A young man who has achieved success should not be arrogant. You still have a long way to go. As he spoke, Shi looked back at Cheng Hua, who had already flown far away. Naughty children had to be educated one by one. His sister-in-law was seriously injured, so Shi naturally would not let the two of them go so easily. Now that Yi had fallen to the ground and could not get up, where could Cheng Hua run to? Thinking of this, Shi could not help but smile. He straightened his fingers and pointed his sword at Cheng Hua. However, just as he was about to shoot out the sword light, Cheng Hua suddenly let out a fierce howl. Immediately after, a strange-looking ship with a dragon head at the bow and a phoenix tail at the stern appeared out of thin air above the town. This time, it was Shi's turn to be stunned. He did not put these two naughty children in his eyes at all, so after coming here, he was too lazy to use his divine sense to carefully scan the surroundings. Who would have thought? How could there be such a strange ship hidden right under his nose? Xingcha. Xingcha was an essential item for cultivators to travel the starry sky. Due to its size and use, Xingcha had already surpassed the category of ordinary magic treasures. This item was extremely rare. On one hand, it required too many materials. On the other hand, it required at least the cultivation of the Dongshu stage to refine Xingcha. Just the latter point alone meant that Xingcha was destined to be precious. Chen Shi knew what was good for him. Thus, the moment he saw the cloud-piercing shuttle appear, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He could not help but look at Yi Ji with an astonished expression, and hurriedly asked, "You too are not from Earth?" Chen Shi was somewhat bewildered, but Cheng Hua was not idle. After climbing onto the cloud-piercing shuttle, Cheng Hua directly slapped a spirit stone on the control panel. Then, he turned the ship around and rushed towards Yi Ji. "Yi Ji, let's go. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com, Wonderful Book House. Com." Chapter 466. It was no wonder that Chen Shi would be surprised. After all, this was a Xingcha. This item was a must-have item for cultivators when traveling or killing people. Based on Earth's current situation, it was obviously impossible to produce such a high-end item like Xingcha. Could it be an antique left behind from the ancient times? Chen Shi carefully observed the Xingcha in front of him and realized that its condition was extremely good. From the outside, there was almost no wear and tear. If he were to use the jargon of the second-hand car market to describe it, then this Xingcha was obviously a new car. It was impossible for it to be an antique that had been buried in the soil for tens of thousands of years. After eliminating this possibility, the problem was naturally simple. This Xingcha in front of him, either it came from Tiandu or it came from the distant outer space. The former was almost impossible because Tiandu had already been destroyed by Chen Shi. Yuan Tianzuan and his family were still watching the stars on Saturn's ring. Thus, there was only one last possibility left. However, in that instant, countless thoughts flashed through Chen Shi's mind. Taking advantage of Chen Shi's momentary daze, Cheng Hua drove the cloud-piercing shuttle and directly caught Yi Ji from below. Then, they flew into the distance like a wisp of smoke. This set of actions could be said to be like moving clouds and flowing water. The overall coordination could be said to be flawless. Just like that, the two of them put on an extremely gorgeous performance of running for their lives right under Chen Shi's nose. The moment Yi Ji boarded the ship, the cloud-piercing shuttle's speed was instantly pushed to the limit by Cheng Hua. If it wasn't for the fact that the mid-grade spirit stone couldn't support the cloud-piercing shuttle's space jump, Cheng Hua would probably have escaped to the moon by now. When the cloud-piercing shuttle rushed out of the stratosphere, the two of them instantly widened their field of vision. Only then did Cheng Hua look at Yi Ji silently with a look of lingering fear. Perhaps it was because they were lucky enough to escape death, but now, the two of them seemed to be in a somewhat depressed mood. Neither of them had the intention to speak. The two of them stared at each other in silence. After a long while, Yi Ji felt that the atmosphere was a little strange, so he couldn't help but break the silence. "The two of us are lucky to be able to escape this time." Yi Ji's tone was filled with relief. When Cheng Hua heard this, he was like an eggplant that had been hit by frost. His hands gripped the rudder tightly, and he remained silent. Even though he wasn't the one getting beaten up. However, the image of Chen Shi toying with Yi Ji was still like a nightmare that lingered in his heart and did not subside for a long time. That man was really too scary. He could actually pinch Yi Ji in his hand and play with him as he pleased. From this, it could be seen how high this person's cultivation was. This matter had completely exceeded the scope of Cheng Hua's imagination, so much so that he didn't even dare to think about it any further. After all, young people had always been impulsive. Usually, they would only realize fear after killing someone. Cheng Hua was in such a situation now. When he thought about his rash actions, Cheng Hua felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head. He only felt a chill run down his spine. He blamed himself for his ignorance and recklessness. When Yi Ji saw this, he didn't reprimand him. Instead, he pretended to be relaxed and comforted him. "Haven't we already escaped? What are you still afraid of? Don't worry, I still have a high-grade spirit stone here. Even if that person wants to chase us, he definitely won't be able to catch up to us. as he spoke, Iji took out the high-grade spirit stone that he had kept for a long time. He raised the spirit stone, indicating that Chenghua didn't need to worry. However, at this moment, an extremely abrupt voice suddenly rang out from the cloud-piercing shuttle. Is that so? The moment he heard this voice, the smile on Iji's face froze. He turned his head stiffly. Following the direction of the voice, he saw the weird uncle, who always hit people's buttocks. At this moment, wasn't he standing proudly at the stern of the shuttle with a faint smile on his face? You what? Call me uncle. Shi rudely interrupted Iji's words. However, he didn't give Iji a chance to speak again. With a light wave of his sleeve, he directly pressed the two youths who were about to fight onto the deck of the shuttle. That's enough, stop struggling. The two of you have been captured by me. Shi's appearance also officially announced that the two youths' escape plan had failed. Then, the cloud-piercing shuttle turned around and headed back to Earth. Unlike when they first arrived, the two youths on the shuttle were now like two roosters who had lost a fight. They lowered their heads and obediently knelt in front of Shi. Looking at how defeated they were now, they probably wouldn't be able to be proud in the future. Xianyuan Chenghua, Dongfang Yiji, right? After a series of torture with spanking as the main punishment, Shi successfully got the names of the two youths. Both of them had two surnames. One was Xianyuan, and the other was Dongfang. It sounded like it had a special charm. Okay, now that I know your names, tell me more about the Supreme Palace enclosure. Shi used to be so focused on returning to Earth that he didn't notice at all. There was a place called the Supreme Palace enclosure at the edge of the solar system. Therefore, when Shi heard this name from Iji, his interest was instantly piqued. Supreme Palace enclosure? What kind of place was that? Since the Supreme Palace enclosure was at the edge of the solar system, why didn't other cultivators come to Earth before? Shi was a little confused. Therefore, he pondered this question while waiting for the two to answer. However, what he didn't expect was, after hearing his question, Chenghua and Iji immediately looked at each other. Neither of them had any intention of answering. I'm asking you a question. Seeing this, Shi didn't hold back. He lifted his leg and gave both of them a kick in the buttocks. One look and one could tell that the two of them were very proud people. People with such personalities were usually amenable to coaxing but not coercion. But regrettably, they just had to meet Shi today. What kind of personality did Shi have? What a coincidence. It just so happened that he was also amenable to coaxing but not coercion. Shi didn't waste any time talking nonsense with them. Not going to speak, right? Then I'll kick you until you speak. Bang. 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 Muffled sounds could be heard from the cloud-piercing shuttle. Shi kicked them one after another. Luckily, their cultivation levels weren't low. Otherwise, their flesh would have been torn apart by Shi's kicks. Of course, to these two unlucky kids, being beaten up was a small matter. Being humiliated was a big deal. The two of them had never been humiliated like this since they were young. Therefore, after being kicked by Shi more than 10 times, Chenghua finally stopped cowering like a quail. He straightened his neck and shouted angrily, "Don't blame me for not warning you. I, Xianyuan Chenghua, swear right here and now. If you kick my buttocks one more time, I will definitely cut you into 1,000 pieces." Oh. Hearing this, Shi couldn't help but laugh. He laughed as he walked in front of Chenghua. He reached out and patted Chenghua's cheek. Then, he asked jokingly, "Are you angry?" Chenghua didn't say anything. He wanted to spit at Shi, but he was trapped by Shi's true yuan. Other than answering the question honestly, he couldn't do anything else. "If you're angry, then hit me. You even swore that you would cut me into 1,000 pieces. Ha 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 ha, little guy, are you a clown sent by the monkeys?" At this moment, Shi no longer had the demeanor of an expert. He laughed proudly, and his words were full of ridicule and mockery. When had Chenghua ever been humiliated like this? As a result, this young man, who had always wanted to compete with the saints of the all heavens, broke down on the spot. The rims of his eyes turned red, and in front of Qin Shi and Yi Ji, tears silently fell from his eyes. Chapter 467. You're crying? Seeing Cheng Hua suddenly cry, Qin Shi couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The psychological quality of young people these days was really bad. That's enough. What's a man like you crying for? Someone like you still dares to go around and do evil? It would have been better if Qin Shi hadn't said that. Now that he did, Cheng Hua's tears were like floodwaters that had been opened. He couldn't stop them. While Cheng Hua was crying like a girl, Yi Ji's eyes were darting around non-stop. He saw that Qin Shi didn't seem to have any intention of harming their lives, so he mustered up his courage and begged for mercy. Sir, we know our mistakes. Sir, please be magnanimous. Can you let us go today? I promise. We definitely won't barge into the Tianshu ruins again. Tianshu ruins? Qin Shi softly repeated this name. Then, he flicked his sleeves and turned to walk to the helm of the ship. You've caused such a huge mess, and you still want to leave? I can ignore the grudges between you and the United States, but, do you know who the woman you injured is? Hearing this, Yi Ji's heart skipped a beat. Then, he asked anxiously, who? She's my sister-in-law. After saying that, Qin Shi didn't give Yi Ji a chance to explain. He directly used his inner energy to lift the two of them off the cloud-piercing shuttle. The cloud-piercing shuttle had already returned to the ruins of the small town. When Qin Shi had arrived, he had already helped Qin Shueqing suppress her injuries. So, in the time it took for them to return, Qin Shueqing had already shakily stood up from the ground. It had to be said that her sister-in-law's current appearance was quite pitiful. What she was wearing was just the most common training suit. It was neither a defensive magical equipment nor a high-tech cloth that could not be torn or broken. Therefore, after being bombarded by Cheng Hua at such close range, Qin Shueqing's training clothes were only left with a few rags. Blood continuously gushed out from the hideous wound. The dark red blood splattered on her snow-white skin, like plum blossoms blooming at the peak of a snowy mountain. Fortunately, the phoenix perch scorched tail box had exploded behind her, leaving her with a few pieces of cloth to cover up her embarrassment. But even so, his sister-in-law had exposed herself today. As for whether or not Qin Shi had peeked at him when she came, only the heavens would know. Do you have any healing elixirs? Give it to me. Qin Shi didn't stand on ceremony with these two brats. Although he told them to take it themselves, in reality, he directly took out a summer mustard pouch from each of them. Seeing this, Yi Ji couldn't help but open his mouth, intending to take the initiative to take medicine for Qin Shi in exchange for better treatment as a captive. Who would have thought, before he could open his mouth, Qin Shi casually tore open his summer mustard pouch as if it were a plastic bag, tore it open. After seeing this scene, not only Yi Ji, but even Cheng Hua, who had tears in the corner of his eyes, couldn't help but open his eyes wide. It must be known that the summer mustard pouch was a magical equipment that could only be used after the owner had dripped a drop of blood on it. If the owner of the magical equipment didn't do it himself, then the bloodline imprint on it had to be erased through refining before the summer mustard pouch could be successfully opened. But now, Qin Shi opened their summer mustard pouches so easily in front of them, then lowered his head and started rummaging through them. This time, Yi Ji was really frightened. After stuttering "you" 3 times in a row, he still couldn't squeeze out a complete sentence. You what? Call me uncle. Qin Shi glared at him, then ignored these two unlucky brats. After taking out a faintly glowing elixir from the summer mustard pouch, he walked straight to Qin Shueqing. Qin Shueqing was resting by a broken pillar at this moment. Seeing Qin Shi walking over with the elixir, she didn't stand on ceremony and swallowed it in one gulp. Needless to say, these two brats really had a lot of good stuff on them. The quality of this elixir was pretty good, probably almost a third of the medicinal properties of the Adumbra flower. Therefore, after Qin Wanqing took it, her originally pale face immediately became rosy at a speed visible to the naked eye. Thank you. Oh, I haven't seen you for a few days and you've learned to be polite? Qin Shi replied with a smile. After carefully observing her condition, he immediately felt relieved. Her condition was still pretty good. After all, his sister-in-law was at the golden core stage. As long as her golden core wasn't broken, her physical injuries would naturally heal after a period of time. Qin Shi started to help his sister-in-law recover, while Cheng Hua and Yi Ji still hadn't recovered from their shock. My father said that only important people who have comprehended the true meaning of the word void can casually tear open the Sumra mustard pouch. You're actually a paragon? Because they were too shocked, even the usually steady Yi Ji couldn't help but raise his voice when he said this. It sounded like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. It was only now that the two of them finally realized, the man in front of them who didn't have the slightest demeanor of an expert was actually a paragon with unparalleled cultivation. A paragon from the Tianshu ruins? Was there a mistake? The two of them were completely shocked by this sudden conclusion. Thinking about how he had just made a heart demon oath to kill a paragon, Cheng Hua couldn't help but tear up again. A newborn calf wasn't afraid of a tiger. That was because the calf didn't know how scary a tiger was. Once it realized how scary a tiger was, how could it not be afraid? Looking at the mysterious man in front of him, then looking at the woman who was covered in wounds, a sense of despair instantly spread rapidly in Yi Ji's heart. It's over, this time it's really all because of you. Back to the Aote Nebula. Just as Cheng Hua and Yi Ji were captured by Qin Shi, a gigantic Xingcha arrived at the place where the two of them had been before. Compared to Cheng Hua's Xingcha, the Xingcha in front of them was like a cruiser. There were many people standing on the ship. As soon as the Xingcha stopped, a man who was obviously the leader turned around and walked into the cabin. "Second madam, we're here." There was a very beautiful woman sitting in the cabin. She was about 30 or 40 years old, but she didn't look old at all. Furthermore, the unique charm of a mature woman gave her an indescribable and strange charm. The man didn't seem to dare to look at the woman. As soon as he entered the cabin, he quickly lowered his head and silently waited for the woman to speak. However, the woman didn't say anything. She got up and walked to the window. After looking through the window at the densely packed meteorites outside, she suddenly thought of something and couldn't help but ask softly, "This is the place where was last seen?" "Second madam, yes." Hearing this, the woman fell silent. After a long time, her voice slowly sounded in the cabin. "Silly child, do you think you can prove that you're stronger than your brother by risking your life like this? Silly, you're really too silly." After hearing the woman's muttering, the man hesitated for a moment before carefully asking in a low voice, "Second madam, why don't I send 2 men of sacrifice in to check it out?" "Go in." The woman seemed to have heard a joke. After chuckling, she waved her hand with a tired face and then muttered in a low voice, "No need, since the Tianshu ruins is known as the Heavenly Venerable Forbidden Area, even if you send 2 Heavenly Venerables in, you'll just lose 2 lives in vain. Silly child, it's fine if you don't cherish your own life. As the head of the guards in the family, don't you understand this principle? This subordinate knows his mistake. Alright, I'm tired. Let's go back, yes." The man quickly walked out of the cabin. At this moment, the woman changed her face like a master of Sichuan opera. Her originally gentle and calm expression suddenly became extremely gloomy and fierce. She glanced coldly outside the window and muttered in a low voice with a gloomy face, "Hua, don't worry. If something happens to you, Mother will definitely bury the entire Shenyuan family with you." Chapter 468. After Qin Shueching recovered a little, Qin Shi was ready to depart with the 2 unlucky kids. However, just as they were about to leave, there was a small episode. The Americans, who didn't even see a shadow during the fight, saw that Qin Shi had settled everything and was ready to leave. They eagerly sent a messenger to negotiate with him. The United States hoped that Qin Shi could hand over Cheng Hua and Yi Ji to them. In exchange, the United States were willing to provide Hua Xia with some cutting-edge exoskeleton armor technology. After witnessing the power of the X-Class, how much did the United States want Cheng Hua and Yi Ji? They were eager to dissect and study these 2 X-Class soldiers of unknown origin. They were even willing to give up years of research results in exchange. The United States had always been used to taking whatever they wanted. They only treated the world as their backyard. This time, they actually offered enough sincerity in exchange. How could Xia not be tempted? After all, in terms of cutting-edge technology research and development, Xia and the United States were at least 20 years apart. After hearing the instructions from the top, the Wu Lian executives nodded and agreed. But what no one expected was, after the order was passed to Qin Shueqing, Qin Shi only used one word to send the messenger away. F***ck off. Qin Shi's attitude was very bad. After the messenger heard this, he was as obedient as a grandson. He didn't even say a word and left on the spot. This kind of behavior really fit the old saying, these days, whoever has the biggest fist has the final say. Without the nuclear bomb as a trump card, the United States couldn't even deal with Cheng Hua and Yi Ji. How would they dare to provoke Qin Shi, who easily captured the two brats? Therefore, the thousands of American soldiers could only wait obediently at the side and watch as Qin Shi and the others swaggered onto the cloud-piercing shuttle. Fuck. Fuck. Chink. God. Damn it. In the battle command center, the colonel in charge of this battle was crazily smashing things. No wonder he was so angry. After all, not only did the target fly away, but the colonel also lost a complete rapid reaction force, causing him to become a commander without an army. No one would be able to swallow such an unlucky thing. However, other than screaming hysterically, what else could he do? Thinking of this, the colonel couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. And the appearance of the mysterious man was deeply imprinted in his heart. With Qin Shi's massive energy as the driving force, the cloud-piercing shuttle finally showed Cheng Hua and Yi Ji its true speed. In the blink of an eye, the cloud-piercing shuttle brought them back to Shangjing City. Ever since the two unlucky brats found out that Qin Shi was at least a supreme martial artist, they behaved extremely obediently. They didn't make a fuss and just quietly knelt on the deck with their heads lowered. Needless to say, this submissive and sorrowful appearance really won the two of them the generous treatment of captives. Qin Shi couldn't be bothered to deal with them personally. After temporarily sealing their cultivation, he directly handed them over to Qin Shueqing. Since the injuries on Qin Shueqing's body were caused by the two of them, whether he wanted to kill or torture them, he had to listen to the opinions of the victims first, right? Qin Shi originally thought that with his sister-in-law's temper, she would kill the two of them on the spot to vent her anger. Who would have thought, after Qin Shueqing seriously considered it, she said with a serious face, "My martial cultivation has already reached a bottleneck. Right now, I need to continuously train myself through actual combat in order to successfully break through. Both of their cultivations are pretty good. They're very suitable for practice." After hearing this, Cheng Hua and Yi Ji couldn't help but raise their heads and look at each other. Then, a trace of despair flashed across their eyes. Was she going to use them as human punching bags? It's over. Their future days would probably be worse than death. Qin Shueqing was injured and still needed to rest for a period of time to fully recover. Hence, Qin Shi brought her back to the courtyard and instructed her not to run around before turning to leave. It was now 2:30 in the afternoon. There was still an hour and a half before Ninian's school ended. It was rare that Qin Ruoying was in the mood today. Qin Shi originally wanted to accompany Yingying to walk around Summer Palace and cultivate their relationship so that he could climb into her bed as soon as possible. In the end, he was delayed by the two brats. Wasn't it already too late? Qin Shi was very depressed. After finding Qin Ruoying through the road sign that he left on her body, he directly rushed towards Qin Ruoying's direction. Qin Ruoying did indeed go to Summer Palace. But when Qin Shi arrived, she had already left the park and was alone in a taxi. Where is Yingying going? Didn't we agree to wait for me to come back to find her? Logically speaking, Qin Ruoying would not run around. But Qin Shi stood her up first, so even if Qin Ruoying was angry and ran around, it would still make sense. Now that Qin Ruoying had already gotten into the car, it was obviously inappropriate for Qin Shi to appear to look for her. Thus, Qin Shi could only follow behind the taxi, wanting to see where Yingying was going. After getting into the car, Qin Ruoying sat in the back without saying a word. She quietly looked at the traffic outside the window. Chen Shi secretly flew not far from the taxi, silently looking at the beautiful face that he yearned for day and night. The car continued to move forward in the rolling traffic, but the hustle and bustle of Shangjing City had nothing to do with them. Finally, the car stopped. Chen Shi looked up and realized that Ying had actually returned to the capital high school. At this moment, there was still half an hour before Nyanyan's school day. After Qin Ruoying got out of the car, she quietly stood by the side of the road, waiting patiently like many other parents. Ying is going to pick up Nyanyan from school? After seeing this scene, Chen Shi could not help but feel a surge of warmth in his heart. He really did not expect, even if she had lost her memory, even if she did not have his company, Ying actually knew to pick up Nyanyan from school on time. Thinking of this, Chen Shi could no longer hold back the excitement in his heart. He hurriedly deactivated his breath control technique and then pretended to be a normal person. After panicking, he appeared from the corner of the street and ran straight to Qin Ruoying's side. Ying, I couldn't accompany you to Summer Palace today, I'm sorry. Chen Shi smiled and explained. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying silently looked at him, then turned to look at the school building in the distance. Not sure if it was an illusion or not. At that moment, Chen Shi seemed to have seen Qin Ruoying lightly nod her head. She seemed to have heard his apology. Chapter 469. Between heaven and earth, life is like a white steed passing by a crack, suddenly. After this matter, Chen Shi and his family's life gradually returned to normal. The long river of time hurriedly passed by. In the blink of an eye, it was the end of the year. Today was February 3rd. The day before New Year's Eve. Although it was not yet a legal holiday, at this time, most of the migrant workers had already returned home. Without the support of the people at the bottom, the big Shangjing suddenly became deserted. There weren't many people in the first place, but today, it was raining and snowing. As the cold wind blew, it gave the capital of the country a bleak feeling. Why was the New Year feeling more and more faint? In recent years, housing prices had skyrocketed, so many people had to bear a huge mortgage because of this. People like Chen Shi who stood at the top of the pyramid and did not need to worry about their lives were a minority. The general public still had to worry about their livelihood every day. Life was not easy. Even during the New Year holidays, most people hoped to be able to work overtime to earn a sum of money. After all, the New Year overtime pay was high, right? Under such great pressure, how could people show the usual heartfelt smile on their faces? Ho-Hai ice rink was deserted, and the bars on the street were basically closed. In the past, they looked forward to the new year. Now, they were enduring the new year. Chen Shi did not want the little girl to suddenly feel that the new year was the most boring time of the year when she thought about it many years later. Therefore, he used the New Year shopping and buying new clothes as an excuse to invite Qin Ruoying to go shopping together. Through careful observation during this time, Chen Shi had already figured out Ying's current style of doing things. She did not care about anything, but she cared about the little girl. Therefore, as long as Chen Shi used the little girl as an excuse and let the little girl act like a spoiled child on the side to assist him, there was a great possibility that he could persuade Qin Ruoying to go shopping with him. Although there were not many people on the street, there was a sea of people in the shopping mall. Nyanyan hadn't been as happy as she was today since she started going to primary school. Although the little fellow's IQ was constantly improving, she was still young after all. So when she saw the children's air cushion toys in the middle of the mall, the little fellow couldn't wait to pull Chen Shi and run over there. Although Nyanyan was now the class leader and was incomparably awe-inspiring in class, she was still like an ordinary child in this inflatable castle. Even a simple inflatable slide could be played back and forth several times. The vigorous exercise soon made the little guy sweat profusely. She seemed to be very excited, and a bright smile hung on her rosy cheeks. Chen Shi smiled and called her to his side. After handing her a bottle of mineral water, the little thing hugged the bottle and gulped it down. Drink slowly. Be careful not to choke. While talking, Chen Shi stretched out his hand to tidy up the scattered hair on the forehead for the little fellow. The little fellow lay on the edge of the air-cushioned bed. After rolling her eyes, she set her eyes on Qin Ruoying. Qin Ruoying stood not far away. Obviously, she was in the downtown area, but she gave people a sense of detachment. To put it bluntly, she was absent-minded. The little fellow was now mischievous. When she saw her mother's idle look, she immediately pouted and said to Qin Shi, "Dad, I don't want to play. It's not fun." "Then what do you want to play? How about Dad take you downstairs to eat?" "No. I want to watch a movie." "Okay, then let's discuss it with Mom." The father and daughter looked at each other. After blinking their eyes, a knowing smile appeared on their faces at the same time. Then, Qin Shi carried the little fellow out of the air-cushioned bed, and then came to Qin Ruoying's side. He asked in a negotiating tone, "Yingying, Nyan said she wants to watch a movie. How about we take her to see it?" After Qin Shi's voice fell, before Qin Ruoying could reply, the little fellow had already pulled on her sleeve and began to act coquettishly. "Mom, I want to watch a movie. Take me to see it, okay?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying looked down at her, and then looked up at Qin Shi, as if to confirm which one of them wanted to watch a movie. Perhaps the little fellow's coquettishness worked. Qin Ruoying didn't think for long. She nodded gently and responded, "Let's go. Mom is so nice." The little fellow happily rubbed her head against her hand a few times. Then, she secretly turned her head and stuck out her little tongue at Qin Shi. Looking at this posture, this little fellow seemed to be asking for credit from Qin Shi. Qin Shi took out his phone to look at the recent movies. He found that only White Snake, Origins, was suitable for a family to watch, so he decisively booked 3 tickets. Before the new year, everyone was busy going home to celebrate the new year. In addition, the New Year's movies were squeezed to be released on the first day of the new year. Therefore, in this huge theater, there were only 2 or 3 audiences sparsely seated. After Qin Shi's family sat down, the little fellow held the popcorn and excitedly twisted it. The last time she watched a movie was last year during the new year, so she couldn't help but be a little excited. Fortunately, there weren't many people in the theater. Otherwise, wouldn't this little fellow disturb the other audiences? Soon, the movie began. Although the little fellow didn't quite understand the plot, the exquisite scene still left a deep impression on her. The red leaves of Snake Catcher Village were like fire, and the scenery was picturesque. Yongzhou City was brightly lit and full of colorful lights. The moment the white snake revealed its true form, the little fellow couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. Although the story was still the same old story, after the movie ended, Qin Shi didn't immediately get up and leave with his wife and daughter. Instead, he sat in his seat and silently reflected on it. He didn't expect that a random movie would coincidentally hit the soft spot in his heart. The movie might not be very good, but it happened to reflect the viewer's heart. The mountains and rivers are easy to shake, this feeling is like a chisel. 1,000 years in a glance, the love of the previous life. In particular, the sentence, "Thank you, husband," at the end of the Easter egg unintentionally and deeply touched Qin Shi. That's right, for real lovers. A mere 500 years, what was the big deal? No matter where he is in the world, no matter what he looks like, no matter whether he remembers me or not, I have to find him, because I remember. This sentence was what Qin Shi wanted to say the most. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but turn his head to look at Qin Ruoying next to him. Wasn't the face that had haunted his dreams right in front of him right now? He didn't know why, at that moment, Qin Shi suddenly reached out for Qin Ruoying's hand as if at the behest of gods and demons. It was warm and moist. Qin Shi was stunned. Because he just realized, Yingying didn't want to dodge. Qin Shi couldn't help but feel a little surprised, so he subconsciously squeezed her soft and boneless hand, as if he wanted to make sure that he wasn't dreaming. There was no doubt that his behavior obviously annoyed Qin Ruoying on the spot. She snorted coldly and immediately stood up from her seat. Then, she carried the confused little fellow and quickly left. "Hey, Yingying, wait for me." Qin Shi didn't have enough fun, and Qin Ruoying turned hostile. Qin Shi had no choice but to put on a bitter face and began to think about how to absolve himself of his rogue behavior. Chapter 470. By the time Chen Shi and his family returned home, the originally gray sky was already covered with a layer of darkness. Looking at the situation, it was estimated that the sky would be completely dark before 5 o'clock. The taxi stopped at the entrance of Dongming Alley. As soon as she got out of the car, the little girl couldn't wait to carry her bag and then ran into the alley like a wisp of smoke. She was in a hurry to go home and change into new clothes. Nian, run slower. Be careful not to fall. Chen Shi smiled and reminded her, then went to the back door. With one hand holding the door, he pretended to be a gentleman and bowed to make a please gesture. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying acted as if she didn't see him. After getting out of the car from the back, she slightly raised her delicate chin and walked into the alley with a cold face. Needless to say, Ying must still be angry with him at this moment. Chen Shi smiled bitterly and shook his head. Then, he hung all the bags of New Year's goods on his body and walked into the alley alone. However, the moment he stepped into the alley, the little girl's clear and pleasant voice suddenly sounded from the depths of the alley. "Uncle, who are you looking for?" The little girl blinked her eyes and looked at the uncle in front of her who seemed to be familiar. After looking up and down, she couldn't remember where she had seen him before. "Ha ha ha ha, Uncle specially came today to give you a New Year's greeting, what? We haven't seen each other for only a few months and you don't recognize your uncle?" Chen Shi was not a peeping Tom, so naturally, it was impossible for him to use his divine sense to observe the surrounding movements at all times. So, when he heard the little girl's voice, he released his divine sense to observe carefully. The visitor who was called uncle by the little girl, it was actually Jiang Yan who hadn't shown up for a long time. Like Chen Shi, Jiang Yan was also carrying bags of various sizes. However, the bags in his hands were not as exquisite as the ones in Chen Shi's hands. However, it was also these seemingly ordinary woven bags that faintly emitted an indescribable and peculiar fragrance. The little guy smelled the fragrance in the bag, so he couldn't help but poke his head in, as if he wanted to know what was inside. "Nian, look, Uncle brought you a lot of good things today." As he spoke, Jiang Yan bent over and opened the bag. He took out a luminous pearl the size of an adult's fist and handed it to the little guy. "Wow! So beautiful." This luminous pearl was slightly different from ordinary luminous pearls. Its light was not the common blue and green, but an extremely rare milky white. The little guy held the night luminescent pearl in front of his eyes. After looking at it carefully, as if he had found a treasure, he ran excitedly to Qin Ruoying's side and held the night luminescent pearl up high as if he was presenting a treasure. "Mom, look, it's a night luminescent pearl." The little fellow loved this luminous pearl so much that he couldn't bear to part with it. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying looked at Jiang Yan cautiously. She didn't know Jiang Yan. However, her instincts told her, the person in front of her was not a good person. Therefore, Qin Ruoying took a step forward without leaving a trace and shielded the little fellow behind her. How smart was Jiang Yan? After seeing Qin Ruoying's vigilant action, he immediately smiled and took a few steps back, indicating that he definitely didn't have any ill intentions. "You wouldn't know if you didn't compare, but you would be shocked once you compared." Qin Ruoying's attitude towards Chen Shi was already bad enough, right? However, to a stranger like Jiang Yan, it was even worse. She didn't even bother to look at Jiang Yan. She hugged the little guy and walked into the courtyard. Luckily, just as Jiang Yan was feeling awkward, the person in question appeared. "Oh, where's the rare guest?" Just like a cook who had just returned home from grocery shopping, Chen Shi glanced at the woven bag beside Jiang Yan and said to Jiang Yan casually, "What's the matter? Let's talk inside." Just like neighbors greeting each other, Chen Shi casually greeted Jiang Yan and turned to enter the house. He didn't stand on ceremony at all. However, Jiang Yan felt uncomfortable. They hadn't seen each other for half a year, but this old man acted as if he didn't know Chen Shi. Jiang Yan timidly wanted to follow him, but just as he took a step, he suddenly retracted his leg as if he had been electrocuted. Chen Shi noticed that something was wrong with him, so he turned around and asked, "What's wrong?" Hearing this, Jiang Yan quickly squeezed out a smile and said with a forced smile, "Nothing, I just came to give you a New Year's greeting. Looking at your wife, she seems to have just woken up. If that's the case, I won't disturb you. These are all gifts I brought from Daiyu Island. They're just some cheap local specialties. I hope you can accept them as a token of my sincerity. I wish you a happy new year in advance. Chen Shi and Jiang Yan were considered acquaintances, so he always felt that Jiang Yan's behavior today was a little strange. However, he couldn't pinpoint exactly what was strange, but he vaguely felt that Jiang Yan seemed to be a little afraid of him. Okay, I'll accept these things. If you don't come in and have a seat, then I won't keep you. Go ahead and do your thing. Chen Shi didn't stand on ceremony with him. After waving his hand and sending all the local specialties brought by Jiang Yan to the courtyard with his true essence, he turned around and walked into the courtyard. Chen Shi entered the house. After the door was gently closed, a strange expression suddenly appeared on Jiang Yan's face. Jiang Yan looked deeply at the door in front of him as if there was still a lingering fear in his heart. After that, he quickly walked out of the alley without batting an eyelid. It was the same as last time. After Jiang Yan walked out of the main street, Jiang Jingqing's figure suddenly appeared in front of him. However, it was different from last time. This time, before Jiang Jingqing could speak, Jiang Yan grabbed his arm and dragged him forward quickly. What's wrong? Jiang Jingqing was a little confused. Just as he was about to ask, Jiang Yan growled and stopped him. Shut up, let's go. After saying that, Jiang Yan waved his sleeves and directly pulled Jiang Jingqing away from Shang Jing as fast as he could. Jiang Yan dragged Jiang Jingqing along for half an hour before finally coming to a stop. After that, Jiang Yan said to Jiang Jingqing in a very serious tone, I saw him. Oh. What's the situation with him now? If it weren't for the news from the United States, I'm afraid we wouldn't even know that he's back. At this point, Jiang Jingqing seemed to have thought of something and couldn't help but mutter in confusion. The news from Celestial Capital said that he fought with the 3 Celestial Venerables on Dragon Head Peak. Although he was severely injured, he was lucky enough to escape. Logically speaking, it's easier to go to heaven than to go to hell. If he didn't obtain the Soul Mirror, why would he suddenly return to Earth? The 9 Serenities information was passed down from Celestial Capital, so they were very clear about the situation when Chen Shi and Yuhuan Tianzun first fought. While Jiang Yan induced Chen Shi to become enemies with Celestial Capital, he also led people to intercept and kill Wushu. Wasn't his goal to incite a war between Chen Shi and Celestial Capital? He had achieved his goal. But what Jiang Yan didn't expect, even in his dreams, what happened next was completely beyond the scope of his imagination. When Chen Shi fought with Yuhuan Tianzun for the second time, not only did he capture the 10 Celestial Venerables in one fell swoop, but he also took the entire Great World with him. The once glorious Celestial Capital, wasn't it just like a pile of mud that had been casually thrown into Saturn's ring? The 9 Serenities had no way of knowing all of this. However, although Jiang Yan didn't know what happened after that, the moment he saw Chen Shi again, he already knew. Mr. Chen was no longer in existence that the 9 Serenities could afford to provoke. Perhaps this was just his intuition. But Jiang Yan was willing to trust his intuition for once. Therefore, he didn't care what Jiang Jingqing was muttering and directly ordered in an irrefutable tone. In the name of the leader of the 9 Serenities, pass down this order. As long as Mr. Chen is still in Huaxia, all members of the 9 Serenities are prohibited from setting foot on Huaxia. If there are any violators, kill without mercy. Chapter 471. As for Jiang Yan's visit, Chen Shi didn't take it to heart. Although he still had some doubts about Jiang Yan's performance today, if he were to secretly follow him and find out what Jiang Yan was up to through tracking, monitoring, eavesdropping, and other means, wouldn't that be giving Jiang Yan too much credit? Chen Shi wasn't that bored. After all, no matter how shrewd Jiang Yan was. For the current Chen Shi, Jiang Yan was just an ant that needed a little effort to crush. No matter how strong an ant was, it was still an ant. The difference between a high-level cultivator and a middle-level cultivator was vividly displayed here. The two couldn't be described in the same sentence. If it were to be described in the words of a scientist, then Chen Shi and Jiang Yan were obviously not living in the same dimension. The essence of cultivation was evolution. Through continuous cultivation, even the weakest mortal might have a day where he could grasp the sun, moon, and stars. Back to Chen Shi's side. When he returned to the courtyard with big and small bags, an extremely strong true essence fluctuation suddenly came from the courtyard. Chen Shi looked up. Wasn't it his sister-in-law who was driving Xingxia back? Qin Shueqing's injuries had already healed. Following her recovery, Cheng Hua and Yi Ji also ushered in the darkest period of their lives. His sister-in-law was very stubborn. She clearly had a perfect cultivation method, but she just didn't use it. Instead, she only cared about exploring and studying it every day, hoping to use her own strength to open up a path of martial arts that belonged to her. This was a brand new path. At the same time, it was also a bumpy road full of thorns. Therefore, Qin Shueqing, in addition to constantly cultivating and accumulating true essence every day, also needed to test the results of her cultivation through a lot of actual combat. As for the actual combat opponents, weren't they the two brats who had been down on their luck for 8 lifetimes? The four-way courtyard couldn't be used, so the sister-in-law would take the two brats out on a xingxia every day. Once they arrived at a remote and inaccessible place, she would have a good spar with them. Of course, rather than calling it a spar, it would be more accurate to call it a one-sided trampling. It should be known that Cheng Hua and Yi Ji's summer mustard seed bags had already been confiscated by Chen Shi. Without the help of their magic treasures, how could the two of them be a match for Qin Shueqing by relying only on the 5 elements magic and some superficial martial arts? Chen Shi was a little worried before. He was afraid that his sister-in-law would be held hostage by the two of them, so he secretly followed them to observe. Who would have thought, the moment the sister-in-law came up, she started a series of smooth close-range combat, beating the two of them on the spot until they cried for their parents. It wasn't that Cheng Hua and Yi Ji hadn't planned to escape. But once they thought about the fact that behind Qin Shueqing stood a supreme martial artist like Chen Shi, the two of them suddenly felt that their legs couldn't exert any strength. They couldn't beat her, and they couldn't run. What else could they do? They could only be beaten up every day. Fortunately, the two of them were young, strong, and had good foundations. Otherwise, wouldn't they have been torn apart by Qin Shueqing? The cloud-piercing shuttle stopped right above the courtyard. For this reason, Chen Shi had specially set up a large-scale concealment array. After getting off the shuttle, Qin Shueqing went straight to the east wing. After that, Cheng Hua and Yi Ji were like seriously ill patients. After helping each other off the shuttle, the two of them obediently walked to the rear wing. The main entrance of the courtyard was one gate, and the Chuehua gate was the second gate. As captives, the two of them naturally didn't have the right to step into the Chuehua gate. Now that they were able to stay in the rear wing, it was already considered a favor from Chen Shi. "Hey, the two of you, come over here for a moment." Chen Shi was sorting through the packages in the courtyard. When he saw Cheng Hua and Yi Ji return, he immediately called out to them. Cheng Hua had just been beaten up, so he was naturally in a bad mood. Thus, he pretended not to hear him and walked to the rear wing. Seeing this, Yi Ji grabbed Cheng Hua and quickly squeezed out a smile. He turned around and replied, "Mr. Chen, what can I do for you?" After spending some time together, Yi Ji had a better understanding of Chen Shi's temperament. It was different from what he had imagined. Chen Shi usually didn't put on any airs. If he hadn't seen Chen Shi's ability before, Yi Ji wouldn't have believed it at all. The man in front of him who was busy taking care of the children and cooking all day was actually a supreme martial artist. What made Yi Ji feel even more strange was, the supreme martial artist had always been elusive in the supreme palace enclosure, and was comparable to a mythical existence. However, in this strange family, Chen Shi was the easiest to talk to. He was as amiable as the uncle next door, without any dignity or airs. Otherwise, how could Chen Shi tolerate Cheng Hua's attitude in front of him? After the two of them walked to the center of the courtyard with their heads lowered, Chen Shi said to them, "Tomorrow is New Year's Eve. Do you know about New Year's Eve? It's a day for the family to reunite here. It only happens once a year." Yi Ji didn't understand the customs of Hua Xia, so he naturally didn't understand what Chen Shi meant. Thus, he asked carefully, Please forgive me for being slow-witted. What do you mean by this? According to our customs here, no matter what you do outside on New Year's Eve, you should go home for the new year. Hearing that, Yi couldn't help but be delighted. He hesitated for a moment before suppressing the excitement in his heart and asked with a nervous expression, "Sir, are you letting us go home?" Go home? She looked at Yi in surprise. He couldn't help but wonder if this child had been beaten silly by Shueching. How is that possible? Even if I agree, Xingxing won't agree. Don't think about going home. Just stay here and practice martial arts with Xingxing. It's good for both of you anyway. At this point, Shi seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He couldn't help but rub his chin and began to wonder if his way of treating the captives was too friendly. Why did it feel like he was educating someone else's child? Forget it. It's rare that we're here for the new year. I'll let both of you enjoy the festivities. I'll go and talk to Xingxing later. She won't beat you for the next 2 days. Both of you can stay at home and have fun with Nian. Just treat it as a holiday so that she won't hurt you. After that, Shi waved his hand, indicating that the two of them could return to the house. The two of them came in confusion and left in confusion. However, before they stepped out of the Chuihua gate, Shi's voice suddenly rang out. "Oh, right, both of you should come for dinner tonight. It's a reunion dinner. The more the merrier." At this moment, Yi was stunned. Changhua was also stunned. The two of them felt like they had misheard. After looking at each other, they couldn't help but turn to look at Shi. Shi noticed their strange behavior, so he put down the bag in his hand and looked at the two of them with a puzzled expression. The two of them looked at each other across the yard. "What's wrong?" "No, nothing." Then, Yi acted like a thief who was caught. He pulled Changhua and hurriedly ran back to the back of the house. After the two of them closed the door and set up an almost useless soundproof restriction, Yi said with a complicated expression, "Changhua, I miss home." "Me too. Do you want to go back?" After hearing Yi's question, Changhua suddenly fell silent. After a long time, he finally replied in a muffled voice, "It's fine if I don't go back." Hearing this, Yi was not surprised. He laid on the bed and stared at the ceiling in a daze, as if he was thinking about something. "I suddenly feel, even if I'm a prisoner here, it seems like a good choice. I'm afraid that if there are too many blessings tomorrow, you won't care about my greetings. I'm afraid that the firecrackers on the first day will be too noisy, you won't hear my blessings. I'm afraid that the dishes on the second day will be too fragrant, you won't see my messages. Therefore, I chose to send you my blessings today. I wish you a happy new year and all the best. I also wish your family's happiness, health, and wealth. Shi Chuanbai is here. I wish you all an early new year. Moi. 3. Chapter 472. February 4th, New Year's Eve. This day was always the busiest day in the courtyard. This was Nian's third New Year's Eve in the courtyard. Although last year's New Year's Eve was also very lively, without Shi and Qin Ruoying, the house always felt like something was missing. So at that time, the little fellow's heart was inevitably a little empty and chatty. But fortunately, those were all in the past. This year's courtyard was much livelier than the year before. Early in the morning, the little fellow twisted the two brats and insisted that they play hide-and-seek with her in the courtyard. As a result, the two 16 or 17-year-old youths carefully followed behind the 6-year-old child, afraid that she would accidentally fall. Changhua and Yi now understood. Wasn't the one with the highest status in this family the little fellow who looked like a porcelain doll in front of them? Since she was the daughter of the Supreme Being, then when she grew up, wouldn't she be an existence comparable to the divine sons and saintesses? The only thing that made the two of them feel a little strange was that Nian didn't have any signs of spiritual energy fluctuations on her body. If it weren't for the fact that she had several extraordinary treasures on her, perhaps the two of them might even have the idea of holding her hostage because of this. Other people's children tempered their bodies at the age of 1 and built their foundation at the age of 3. However, when it came to Shi, Nian was still like an ordinary child at the age of 6. He couldn't see anything different about her at all. Regarding this, Chung Hua and Yi Ji could only sigh silently in their hearts. The way the Supreme Being educated children was indeed not something that ordinary people like them could guess. New Year's Eve. It was nothing more than a reunion dinner, fireworks, and watching the Spring Festival Gala. Year after year, there really wasn't anything new to play with, so there was no need to go into detail here. The only thing worth noting was, perhaps it was because Nian Nian was too young, so it was indeed difficult for her to get the excitement of the Spring Festival Gala. Therefore, after sitting for a short while, the little thing began to wander around the room, scratching its itch. Chung Hua and Yi Ji had never watched TV before. Therefore, from the moment the Spring Festival Gala started broadcasting, the two of them never looked away from the television. The more the others watched, the more bored Nian Nian was to watch by the side. Thus, after the little thing rolled her big eyes around, she moved closer to Chen Shi and said coquettishly, "Daddy, I want to watch a movie." As soon as she finished speaking, she pursed her lips and deliberately put on an aggrieved look. Movie? Chen Shi was stunned for a moment. He looked up at the Spring Festival Gala skit that was playing on the TV, and then looked down at the little fellow who was looking forward to it. He thought she wanted to watch cartoons, so he picked up the remote control and asked, "What do you want to watch?" "Daddy will give you some." However, after the little guy heard his words, he quickly shook his head and muttered unhappily, "I don't want to watch it at home. I want to go to the cinema. Let's watch a big movie." Some time ago, White Snake left a deep impression on the little fellow. He did not expect her to be addicted to watching movies because of it. Today is New Year's Eve. Everyone has gone home for the new year. I don't know if the cinema is open for business. Chen Shi would never refuse the little fellow's request. Therefore, after pinching the little fellow's nose, he smiled and took out his phone to check it out. According to his understanding, at this time, not to mention the cinema, even the barbecue stall would have to go home for the new year. However, what Chen Shi did not expect was, it was the new year, and the cinema was still open. Wandering Earth? Chen Shi looked at the movie schedule and found that many cinemas only had this one movie schedule. He handed the phone to the little fellow and let her decide whether she wanted to watch it or not. "Let's watch this. I want to watch Earth." The little fellow was not shy. After seeing the Earth on the movie poster, she immediately twisted Chen Shi excitedly and shouted loudly, "Okay, let's watch this then." As he spoke, Chen Shi gently patted the little fellow. This was an exclusive secret signal between the father and daughter. After all, in this family, the father did not have the final say. It was the mother's approval that counted. After the little fellow received the order, she immediately went to Qin Ruoying's side and then began to act coquettishly with her. "Mom, I want to watch a movie. Take me to the movie." "Okay? Okay." In this regard, Qin Ruoying agreed very quickly. Almost without hesitation, she nodded gently. After receiving the official's approval, the family of three set off in the middle of the night. Naturally, Chung Hua and Yi Ji accompanied them. Of course, the two of them were not really curious about the movie. The reason why they followed Chen Shi out in a panic was purely to avoid sitting under the same roof as Qin Shueching. It could be seen that the two of them were traumatized by their sister-in-law. There was not a single soul on the streets, but the movie theater was full of people and was very lively. The audience had great expectations for Wandering Planet, which was known as the sci-fi masterpiece of Huaxia. It had to be said that the Huaxia audience's tolerance was indeed very high. No matter how bad the movie was, as long as a few celebrities were involved, they could earn back the box office no matter what. The audience had long been scared of being deceived, so when they bought tickets, they were a little nervous. They were afraid that they would accidentally fall into the trap of a trashy director. Fortunately, it was not a scam this time. It was finally worth the ticket price. Didn't Chung Hua and Yi Ji just pass by Jupiter a while ago? Therefore, when the two of them saw the realistic and spectacular special effects on the big screen, they were immediately shocked by everything in front of them. Yi Ji, is this the entertainment method of a low-level technological civilization? It seems to be very different from what we imagined. Well, it seems that a low-level technological civilization is not without merit, even if there is no supreme existence like Mr. Chen. With the accumulation of their own civilization, they would probably be able to control the entire Tianshu ruins within 1,000 years. While watching the movie, the two of them secretly communicated with their divine senses. It was only at this time that the two of them could speak freely and say what they were thinking. The two of them only thought that they could use a secret technique to block Qinshi's perception, but they did not think that, since they could use a secret technique to block Qinshi's perception, how could Qinshi not use a secret technique to eavesdrop on their conversation? Supreme Palace Enclosure. Unlike Earth, the Supreme Palace Enclosure was not spherical. Instead, it was a continental plate floating in the universe. At the end of the land was the universe. This was the so-called square sky and square Earth. In addition, an existence similar to the Supreme Palace Enclosure was actually very common in the universe. When Qianxi was in the Heavenly Jade Realm, he had once been in charge of a sacred cultivation ground similar to the Supreme Palace Enclosure. That was why he was given the title of Divine Lord. Divine Lord Qianxi was the actual ruler of this sacred ground. Therefore, sometimes one only needed to directly judge the level of a sacred ground based on the ruler's title. Sacred cultivation grounds were also divided into good and bad. Among them, the best was naturally a mother planet like the Heavenly Jade Realm that could continuously produce spirit chi of heaven and earth. A little lower was the current Earth, which was the Tianshu ruins that Cheng Hua and Yi Ji spoke of. Next was the Supreme Palace Enclosure. Just like the Great World, the Supreme Palace Enclosure itself was not a planet. Therefore, no matter how prosperous it was now, it would inevitably fall into desolation one day, just like Earth when its spirit chi was exhausted. The day the spirit chi was exhausted was the moment the Supreme Palace Enclosure welcomed the arrival of Doomsday. Of course, this process of exhaustion usually took tens of thousands of years, so there was no need to worry too early. The reason was very simple. After all, no matter how long cultivators lived, how many of them could successfully live for tens of thousands of years? Yesterday was the reunion year, today was the reunion year, and the day after tomorrow was the reunion year. Originally, he wanted to relax for the next few days, but after thinking about it, he still felt that he should not stop updating, so he forced himself to get up and continue writing. In short, I wish everyone a happy new year. Remember to use the tickets if you have them. Monthly tickets, recommendation tickets, rewards, I will not reject any of them. I have never asked for these things. After all, with my current results, even if you vote for me, I won't be able to get on the list. However, it's the new year, so the data should look better, right? It's just for the sake of celebration. Thank you in advance. Big shots moi 3, oh, right, Wandering Earth is really not bad. There are flaws, but it's still acceptable. After all, this is just the beginning. I used to write science fiction and have always liked watching science fiction movies, so I'm very happy that China can produce such a science fiction movie. If you encounter a troll during the movie who keeps picking on you and saying things that are unscientific and unreasonable to disgust you, then please respond to him decisively. Autobots, transform. Do you believe that I, Thanos, will destroy you with a snap of my fingers? Chapter 473. The movie was pretty good. At least the little girl didn't fall asleep. After watching the movie, she even excitedly twisted around Qianxi and said, "Daddy, space is so beautiful. When are you going to bring me to pick the stars?" In response, Qianxi didn't just brush her off. Instead, he told her seriously, when she turned 18, he would definitely fulfill his promise and bring her to pick the stars and the moon in space. Daddy is the best. Could this promise be fulfilled? For the little girl, this wasn't important at all. In reality, she just wanted to hear her father make a promise to her seriously. Every time this happened, her face would naturally reveal a pure smile that could melt a person's heart. She was happy because her father agreed to her request. The little girl was extremely happy, but Cheng Hua and Yi Ji were like mute people who had eaten Chinese medicine. They felt bitter and frustrated. After all, a good cloud-piercing shuttle was stolen just like that. Anyone would be depressed, right? This movie was 2 hours long, so when Qianxi and his family left the theater, it was already 2 in the morning. February 5th, early morning. A new year had quietly arrived. The little girl yawned and then laid on Chen-Shi's shoulder like a koala bear. She soon fell asleep. Hearing the sound of steady breathing, Chen-Shi couldn't help but reveal a faint smile on his face. The wind on the street was very light. It was as if everything was silent. Shangjing, known as the city that never sleeps, finally quieted down. Only the roar of cars could be heard from time to time, telling the passers-by about the city's past glory. This New Year's Eve was still considered perfect and happy. At the beginning of the new year, everything was renewed. After the bustling new year, the little girl started her school life again. Once the child went to school, the parents naturally had more free time. Chen-Shi originally planned to go back to his old business, but without a capable manager like Xiao Yuan, he didn't want to waste time and effort running the tea house, so he just closed it. Now, other than sending Nian to and from school every day, Chen-Shi didn't have a reason to go out anymore. Therefore, he stayed at home all day thinking about how to win over his wife. Although he said he was trying to win over her, he was actually strolling around with Qin Ruoying every day. Today, they strolled from the west gate to the east gate. Tomorrow, they strolled from the south gate to the north gate. They really went through every nook and cranny of Shangjing. During this time, it wasn't that Chen-Shi didn't think about how to retrieve Ying's memories. But the soul mirror was like a dead phone. No matter what Chen-Shi did, she couldn't activate it. Chen-Shi had no choice but to make a trip to Saturn's ring and conduct a friendly interview with Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan. Although Tiandu had lost its hometown, it still retained most of its high-end combat power. Therefore, Yuan Tianzuan tried to use the secret of the soul mirror as an exchange for better treatment as a captive. One had to know that Saturn didn't have abundant heaven and earth spirit qi. If they were trapped here for a long time, even Yuan Tianzuan would end up like a lamp that had run out of oil, let alone a divine general with a lower cultivation. Yuan Tianzuan thought that his request wasn't excessive at all, but he didn't expect. He had just made the request, but Chen-Shi had flatly refused. Her attitude was very firm, and there was no room for negotiation. Impossible, don't mention this again. As long as I'm here, you'll never be able to return to Earth. Because of this, Yuan Tianzuan's face alternated between green and white. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't beat Chen-Shi, he would have already turned hostile and rushed up. Fortunately, Chen-Shi was not a homicidal maniac who treated human lives as worthless. Therefore, before Heavenly Venerate Yu Huan could do anything in his desperation, Chen-Shi had directly proposed the solution that he had thought of previously. Don't think about Earth, the moon is a good place, you know the moon? It's the moon in the sky. Before I came, I already confirmed that as long as there is a spirit qi tied on Earth, a part of the spirit qi will surge to the moon. Although it's not much, it's enough to maintain your daily cultivation. Yuan Tianzuan was naturally very dissatisfied with Chen-Shi's arrangement. But, so what if he was dissatisfied? As the saying went, one had to lower their heads under the eaves. If he really angered Chen-Shi, it wouldn't be a problem of whether there was enough spirit qi, but a problem of whether Tiandu could continue to exist. Yuan Tianzuan compromised. Therefore, Chen-Shi undid the seal that was previously set, and then led the group of Tiandu people to fly to the moon. At the same time, the Haute Nebula at the edge of the solar system suddenly welcomed a visitor. The visitor was a young girl. She was about 15 or 16 years old, in the prime of her youth, so she looked really pretty. Although the young girl was not old, she was quite brave. She actually dared to drive Xingxia alone to this ancient forbidden area that everyone talked about. Of course, daring to come didn't mean that she was not afraid. Even before she got close to the meteorite belt, the young girl's face was already a little pale from nervousness. Brother Dongfang, are you there? As if to drive away the fear in her heart, the young girl stood at the bow of the ship and shouted loudly toward the forbidden area. There was no medium to transmit sound in the universe. Therefore, rather than saying that she was shouting, it was better to say that she was constantly instilling vital essence into the forbidden area. The universe was really too big. One had to know that the Haute Nebula was like an eggshell. It included the entire solar system, so how big was its volume? Compared to it, the the young girl was so small that she could be ignored. So even if she used the voice transmission's secret method, how far could her shout be transmitted? The young girl was extremely scared. She kept shouting, but there was no response from the forbidden area. No, Brother Dongfang will be fine. After shouting continuously for about 4 to 5 hours, the young girl finally despaired. In fact, from the moment she heard the news, she was already in despair. The reason why she still came here was to use facts to convince herself and to shatter the last trace of fantasy in her heart. Brother Dongfang, you said you would wait for me to grow up. You said you would marry me, the young girl cried out in despair. Bean-sized teardrops continued to slide down her cheeks, coupled with her beautiful and lovely appearance. The ignorant young girl in front of him gave off a poignant feeling like a pear blossom in the rain. Young people didn't understand love and were always the most infatuated. In fact, it was only at the age when one didn't understand love that one could love someone to death. You said you would marry me. After muttering this sentence a few times, the young girl finally seemed to have made an important decision. She gently wiped away the tears on her face. Then, a bright smile appeared on her face. Brother Dongfang, I'm coming for you, wait for me. After speaking, the young girl closed her eyes and drove the Xing Cha to the Haute Nebula at full speed. Jiutian Divine Emperor. Chapter 474. For the people in the Supreme Palace enclosure, the solar system was the supreme forbidden land in ancient myths and legends. The so-called forbidden land was naturally a place that everyone kept a secret and even changed their expressions when talking about it. Even if there was no one guarding it, there were always few people there, so many people might have never been there in their lives. However, although many people had not personally explored the Forbidden Land, if the Forbidden Land was mentioned, they could open their mouths and describe it in more detail than those who had seen it with their own eyes. There was an ancient saying, 3 people make a tiger, gossip is a fearful thing. This was the terrifying part of rumors. After the exaggerated narration by the busybodies, the Tianshu ruins became synonymous with the horror of today. Especially after a heavenly venerable died in front of everyone's eyes, the various rumors about the Tianshu ruins seemed to have been confirmed. Tianshu ruins. Heavenly venerable forbidden land. Even heavenly venerable level big shots could not step into it, who would complain that their life was too long and insist on breaking into the forbidden land again? Unless they did not want to live anymore. Therefore, when this infatuated girl confirmed that her brother Dongfang had entered the Tianshu ruins, she was so desperate and helpless. Was this love? Who knew? Anyway, there was no reason to be in love. Perhaps when she grew up, she would laugh at her foolishness today, but she would never regret her decision today. After all, she just happened to be at the age of the first awakening of love and met the person she liked. The girl gently closed her eyes. Then, with a calm smile on her face, she drove Xing Cha quickly to the meteorite belt not far away. She was even mentally prepared to be smashed into pieces and her soul destroyed in the next moment. But she never thought. She closed her eyes and waited for a long time. When she opened her eyes again, what entered his eyes was not a land of death that was filled with danger and death. Instead, it was a boundless sea of stars that was quiet and peaceful. When one looked up, the stars in the sky were all stars. The universe was very big, and the solar system was very small. There was only one star in the entire solar system, and that was the sun. Because it was too far away, in the eyes of the young lady, the sun was like a star, silently hanging in the pitch-black sky. She turned back to look at the Haute Nebula behind her. The dense comets blocked her view like a natural moat, completely separating the Supreme Palace enclosure from the Dubhe ruins. The girl stood at the bow of the ship and looked around, her eyes filled with disbelief. How could she enter the Tianshu ruins so easily? After a long period of calmness, the girl finally accepted the reality in front of her. Since she was fine, it meant, the Tianshu ruins were not as dangerous as the legend said. Perhaps Big Brother Dongfang had already explored it. The girl instinctively wanted to chase after him. However, after thinking about it for a while, she suddenly turned the ship around and rushed back to the Haute Nebula. This place is too big. If I want to rely on my own strength to find Brother Dongfang, this is tantamount to looking for a needle in a haystack. No, I have to bring this news back. Unlike Cheng Hua's recklessness and greed, the young girl did not care about the final ownership of the Dubhe ruins. Therefore, when she confirmed that the Tianshu ruins were not dangerous, she wanted to bring this news back as soon as possible so that more people could help her find her brother Dongfang. While the girl hurried back to the Supreme Palace enclosure, Qin Shi was not idle either. He arranged the Tiandu group on the dark side of the moon. Therefore, from this moment on, Tiandu was really floating in the sky. The thing to note here was, because while the moon revolved around the Earth, the moon itself was also rotating. In addition, its rotation period was the same as its rotation period, so no matter where you stood on the Earth and looked up at the sky, humans would always only see one side of the moon. As for the other side that could not be seen, it was called the dark side of the moon. In order to prevent Yuhuan Tianzuan from sneaking to the Earth, Qin Shi also set up a large ceiling formation on the dark side of the moon. There were still a lot of high-end combat power in Tiandu. If they combined their strength, they might be able to break this formation by force. However, this place was too close to the Earth. Even if Yuhuan Tianzuan wanted to break the formation by force, Qin Shi could immediately rush over to stop him. Therefore, after setting up the formation, Qin Shi was completely relieved. At this time, Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have accepted his fate. Ever since the collapse of the big world, causing Tiandu to be forcibly relocated to the solar system, Yuhuan Tianzuan was like a defeated rooster. He was dejected all day long and was no longer as elegant as before. It stood to reason that a proud person like Yuhuan Tianzuan would not completely lose his fighting spirit because of one failure. Qin Shi guessed that there must be some secret. Therefore, he arranged for the Tiandu group to be on the moon. After fulfilling his promise that he would treat the remnants of Tiandu well, he took the soul mirror and talked to Yuhuan Tianzuan again. Qin Shi was prepared to extort a confession by torture, but he did not expect Yuhuan Tianzuan was much more straightforward than he thought. Perhaps Qin Shi was overthinking, but in short, he felt that Yuhuan Tianzuan was not too hostile to him now. Instead, he seemed to have a lot to say to him. Mutual appreciation? I'm afraid not. The two flew side by side to a nearby ring-shaped mountain top. Looking at the sparkling blue planet not far away, Yuhuan Tianzuan's tone was no longer as overbearing as before. Instead, there was an inexplicable sense of desolation. It turned out that, as early as 10,000 years ago, the Tai Ching ancestor left a prophecy that Tiandu would be destroyed one day. At that time, only the soul mirror could ensure that Tiandu's incense would continue to burn and pass down. In this regard, the 10 celestial lords of Tiandu naturally believed in it. It was precisely because of this that when Yuhuan Tianzuan learned that the spiritual qi of the lower realm had begun to recover, he began to plan to build a soul bridge and lead everyone back to Earth. The ancient immortal cultivators were forced to leave Earth, so it was natural for them to return now. Everything should have gone according to plan. Unfortunately, Qin Shi's appearance caused Yuhuan Tianzuan to be forced to activate the Sun-Moon-Star Array. And everything that happened afterward completely refreshed his worldview. It wasn't until the moment the 9 stars aligned that Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly realized, things were not as simple as the previous celestial lords had imagined. The Tai Ching ancestor must have hidden some shocking secret. In fact, there weren't many records of the soul mirror and the Sun-Moon-Star Array in the ancient books left behind by the great ancestor. Even an outsider like Qin Shi could see the extraordinariness of the Sun-Moon-Star Array at a glance. How could the previous celestial lords of Tiandu not see through it? Therefore, the previous celestial lords all thought that the Sun-Moon-Star Array was the last life-saving straw that the Tai Ching ancestor had prepared for Tiandu. Who would have thought the price of activating the array was so painful? Could this be the so-called trump card? Without needing the enemy to make a move, he would first destroy the foundation. During this period of time, Yuhuan Tianzuan had been thinking about why the Tai Ching ancestor would make such an arrangement. Combined with the ancient records that he had read in the Imperial Hall, coupled with his own personal experience, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly remembered a terrifying rumor that had been circulating since ancient times. The content of the rumor was actually very simple, that was, the reason why the Tai Ching ancestor led the ancient immortal cultivators to the great world to establish Tiandu was not to save the common people from suffering, but to satisfy his own selfish desires. This Tai Ching ancestor, who was regarded as a god by the ancient immortal cultivators, in fact, he was a despicable person who pretended to be righteous. The holiday is over. The new year has begun. I will strive to write more words. At the same time, I wish everyone good luck in the coming year and get promoted and rich as soon as possible. Chapter 475. The divine ancestor had once said that when Tiandu was in danger, the formation could be activated to ensure the continuation of Tiandu's inheritance. Although the Sun-Moon star formation was very powerful, the most crucial part of it was obviously that seemingly useless Khanate supreme treasure, the sky-bearing mirror of floating dawn. In addition, there were many different opinions about the origin of this Khanate supreme treasure within Tiandu. Some said it was the divine ancestor's natal magic treasure, while others said it was inadvertently found in the depths of the void. As for which was true and which was false, perhaps only the divine ancestor himself knew. Successive celestial venerables had carefully studied the soul mirror, but no one could discover any secrets from it. Over time, this Khanate supreme treasure was completely reduced to a useless decoration. Yuan Tianzuan was ambitious and naturally would not easily believe that the soul mirror was useless. From the day he became a celestial venerable, he had been constantly thinking about how to take the soul mirror for his own use. In order to achieve this goal, Yuan Tianzuan had even flipped through all the ancient records related to the divine ancestor. In addition to some obviously official biographies, he had even searched for many unofficial histories from the people. Thus, Yuan Tianzuan gradually understood some of the secrets of the ancient times. What needed to be mentioned here was that as long as there was political power, there would inevitably be opponents. Tiandu was no exception. The divine ancestor was not a national treasure and could not be liked by everyone, so it was inevitable that there would be some thieves with evil intentions spreading rumors to slander the divine ancestor. It was from these traitors that Yuan Tianzuan had obtained this unofficial history that was close to a rumor. According to the unofficial records, the divine ancestor was not as glorious and great as people imagined. Instead, he was an out-and-out hypocrite, 10,000 times more disgusting than Mount Hua. History was always written by the victors. 10,000 years had passed, so how much of the past could the people of later generations remember? Wasn't it still just reading the ancient records left behind by the predecessors? In the official history, the divine ancestor's greatness did not need to be repeated, because he had long become a god worshipped by everyone in Tiandu. But in this unofficial history, the image of the grand pure divine ancestor was completely different from what everyone knew before. Even if his cultivation was unparalleled, he still had the heart of 5 poisons that everyone had: greed, anger, stupidity, hesitation, and doubt. It was precisely because of this that the Grand Pure One in the unofficial history was no longer a flawless ancient myth. Instead, he was more like a living person. In fact, whether it was official history or unofficial history, these were all written by people who had come before them. As long as it was recorded by someone, it would definitely have a certain degree of subjectivity. Not to mention, this unofficial history that could be said to be treasonous came from the Jiang clan's ancestor that had long since been listed as a sinner. The ancestors of the Jiang clan had always been enemies of Tiandu, so it was naturally impossible for them to respect the divine ancestor like the common people of Tiandu did. Therefore, Yuan Tianzuan originally did not take these fabricated unofficial histories seriously. It was not until the destruction of Tiandu that Yuan Tianzuan suddenly woke up. Could it be that the contents of this unofficial history were true? Unofficial history? Show it to me. Hearing this, Chen Shi's gossipy soul couldn't help but burn up. Just like how modern people were always full of curiosity about ancient emperors. Such a stunning figure like the Grand Pure One would naturally make Chen Shi yearn for him. He couldn't help but want to learn more from the mouths of others. After hearing Chen Shi's words, Yuan Tianzuan hesitated. After all, he was the head of the 10 celestial venerables and the current actual ruler of Tiandu. Wasn't the act of slandering the divine ancestor the same as smearing feces on him? Could it be that he had to praise, well smeared, so fragrant? Hurry up, what are you dawdling for? Just show it to me. I'm not a person of Tiandu. Are you afraid that I'll rebel after seeing it? Seeing that Yuan Tianzuan was somewhat hesitant, Qin Shi kept urging him. There was no other way. Yuhuan Tianzuan really couldn't persuade Qin Shi. He could only take out a palm-sized jade slip from his mustard seed bag with a hesitant expression. The so-called jade slip was the carrier that cultivators used to record important information. The content was neither words nor sound, but consciousness. Qin Shi snatched the jade slip from Yuhuan Tianzuan's hand and poured his divine sense into it. The information recorded in the jade slip immediately poured into his mind. Interesting. After silently digesting the information in the jade slip, the corners of Qin Shi's mouth couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. Just as Yuhuan Tianzuan said, the information in the jade slip was filled with a large amount of slandering of the Grand Pure One's sacred ancestor. However, after excluding these slanderous words, the most important information was actually about the ancestor of the Jiang clan. Although the Jiang clan was very weak now, in ancient times, the ancestor of the Jiang clan and the Grand Pure One's sacred ancestor were fellow disciples. The Grand Pure One's sacred ancestor was so amazing. As his junior brother, how weak could the ancestor of the Jiang clan be? This, even Jiang Yan didn't know much about. The name of the sect that the Grand Pure One's sacred ancestor belonged to was no longer known, but there was no doubt that the earth of that era was indeed very powerful, far surpassing the current Tianxian. Of course, the earth at that time wasn't called Earth, but was called Dubhe Realm. In short, it was an era where heroes came forth in large numbers. If it wasn't for the sudden depletion of the spirit chi of heaven and earth, there probably wouldn't be any modern humans. Logically speaking, since the ancestor of the Jiang clan and the Grand Pure One's sacred ancestor were fellow disciples, how could his descendants be labeled as sinners by the sacred ancestor? There must be some secret hidden within, but this jade slip didn't record it in detail. Other than some meaningless slander, Qin Shi couldn't find a single useful piece of information. This kind of feeling was like someone exposing a celebrity's scandals on the internet. No matter what the rumor mongers said, how could they convince people without concrete evidence? Qin Shi held the jade slip in his hand and rubbed it carefully, as if he was thinking about something. One had to know that jade slips had always been used to record important information. How could they only record some baseless slander? In the words of the netizens, that was, how could there be no real evidence? Thinking of this, Qin Shi couldn't help but pour his divine sense into the jade slip again, and try to find some useful information from it. This time, he looked very carefully. He carefully studied the jade slip from the inside to the outside. And it was precisely because of this that Qin Shi actually managed to find a seal in this seemingly ordinary jade slip. This seal was very strange. It actually contained some of the true meaning of the word void, so that others couldn't discover its existence at all. In other words, only cultivators at the Dongxiu realm could successfully read its contents. Yuhuan Tianzuan's cultivation was only at the mid-deity transformation stage, so even if the jade slip had been in his hands all this time, he didn't know that there were other contents hidden in the jade slip. Therefore, the moment Qin Shi discovered this seal, he already realized, what he was about to uncover, could be a shocking secret that had been covered in dust for tens of thousands of years. Chapter 476. The information in the jade slip was transmitted through consciousness. Therefore, from Qin Shi unlocking the seal to him knowing all the contents in it, all this happened in the blink of an eye. Although Yuhuan Tianzuan's cultivation couldn't be compared with Qin Shi's. But at that moment, he was still keenly aware of a slight expression change on Qin Shi's face. What's wrong? One had to know that Yuhuan Tianzuan was not an easy person to deal with. So, this old guy immediately pretended to be concerned and asked, "Did you find any problems?" "Nothing, I just feel that the empty slander above is a bit funny." Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan tried to discover something from Qin Shi's face, but Qin Shi merely smiled and shook his head. Then, he pretended to be at ease and threw the jade slip back to Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan. After Yuhuan Tianzuan took the jade slip, he quickly checked it with his divine thought. After confirming that there was nothing strange in it, he was slightly relieved. "Okay, that's it for today, I have to go back and pick up the children from school. You stay here and preside over the reconstruction work of Tiandu. If you guys perform well, maybe I'll consider accepting your immigration application, but before that, you all stay here obediently, you are not allowed to go anywhere. once I find out that you are trying to escape from here, I think you should be very clear about the consequences. After Qin Shi gave a series of orders in a bureaucratic tone, the expression on Emperor Yu Huan's face was marvelous. Are you really treating us as captives? Yu Huan Tianzuan cursed in his heart. But due to Qin Shi's abuse of power, he could only snort softly and vent the dissatisfaction in his heart. Qin Shi left the moon. But he did not immediately return to the courtyard, but flew aimlessly outside the atmosphere, looking at the boundless starry sky while silently sorting out the information he got from the jade slip. The information in the jade slip could be divided into two parts. On the surface, the content was to insult the Grand Pure One and slander him. The content hidden under the seal was a complete description of what had happened in the past from the perspective of a bystander. There was too much information in the jade slip. In addition, the person who left the jade slip didn't have a very firm position, so Qin Shi could only sort it out bit by bit. First of all, it could be concluded that the contents of the two sections were not left by the same person. Qin Shi guessed that it was very likely that the true owner of the jade slip was a descendant of the Jiang clan's ancestor, or even a close relative within 3 generations. In other words, it was in existence like a son, grandson, disciple, or grand disciple. The hidden content under the seal was left behind by this person. As for the content outside the seal, there was a high probability that it was randomly added by the descendants of the Jiang clan. They didn't know what had happened back then, so they could only try their best to slander the sacred ancestor. From this, it could be seen that the Jiang clan's ancestor did not tell his descendants everything that happened back then. Thinking about it, this was also a form of protection. According to the records in the jade slip, the Grand Pure One and the Jiang clan's ancestor were indeed from the same sect. At that time, the overall strength of the Heaven's Pivot Realm was very powerful. According to the description in the jade slip, the Grand Pure One and the Jiang clan's ancestor had already reached the legendary half-saint realm. Half-saint? Qin Shi pondered for a long time before he made a rough judgment in his heart. Yuanying was equivalent to a divine general. Soul formation was equivalent to a heavenly venerable. Insightful void was equivalent to a supreme. The owner of the jade slip was a supreme. Then, the Grand Pure One, who could be called a half-saint by him, should at least be a big shot at the Tao integration stage, right? Thinking of this, Qin Shi lowered his head to look at the azure planet again. He was slightly excited and could not calm down. Earth was still the same Earth. However, the Earth of that era was completely different from the Earth of today. As the saying goes, heroes are created by the times. That era was simply a glorious era where stars gathered and heroes emerged in large numbers. But unfortunately, no matter how good the era was, it would eventually come to an end. As the spirit chi on Earth began to weaken rapidly, the glory of the Heaven's Pivot Realm was no longer the same as before. The ancient immortal cultivators had no choice but to start looking for a new cultivation holy land in order to continue their legacy. Just like in sci-fi movies, once the apocalypse arrived, everyone would make different choices. Thus, some people proposed to give up on the Heaven's Pivot Realm. With the half-saint as the leader, they would lead everyone across the void and find another place to live in the universe. In today's words, this group of people were typical radicals. This was because at least at the Golden Core stage could fly. Only at the Yuanying stage could one live freely in the universe for a long time. Since they could make such a suggestion, it actually meant that they wanted to give up on cultivators below the Yuanying stage. What kind of terrifying suggestion was this? Who didn't have relatives, friends, parents, and relatives in their life? Take Qin Shi as an example. He was already lonely enough, but how many people above the Yuanying stage did he have by his side? Cultivation was about talent and fate. Sometimes in life, one must have it, and when not in life, one should not force it. Yuanying was not so easy to get married. Once this decision was made, it was equivalent to giving up on most people on Earth. Even if the half-saint could lead many people across the void at the same time, he could not take everyone on Earth with him. What about the rest of the people? Let them perish on their own? Thus, this suggestion was quickly rejected. Seeing this, Qin Shi could not help but feel a little puzzled. Didn't Changhua and Yiji come from the Supreme Palace enclosure? Wasn't the Supreme Palace enclosure near the solar system? With the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor's realm, even if he used a stupid method that was close to moving a mountain, he could still bring everyone to the Supreme Palace enclosure, right? Could it be that the ancient immortal cultivators did not know that there was such a good place as the Supreme Palace enclosure near the solar system? Shi really did not understand this point. But fortunately, this question was not important, so he quickly put this question to the back of his mind and then went on to sort it out. After the radical faction's suggestion was rejected, the conservative faction led by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor and the Jiang Ancestor proposed a compromise. That was: integrate all the forces in the Tianshu realm and send out the strongest people from each sect. Then, these people would be led by a half-saint to find a suitable cultivation holy land in the universe. After they found it, everyone would come back to discuss how to move everyone on Earth over. This suggestion was unanimously approved by everyone. At the very least, they would not just pack up and leave, right? Thus, the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor and the others set off. But what no one expected was, when they left, they were gone for as long as 20 years. The people who stayed on Earth looked forward to the stars and the moon every day, almost always looking forward to their return. Finally, the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor and the others returned. It was important to note that when the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor set off, his cultivation was not much different from the others. He was only a half-saint. But by the time he came back, the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had stepped into an unprecedented realm, a saint. This was an extremely good thing. After all, even though the Tianshu realm was unparalleled at that time, it had been tens of thousands of years since a saint had appeared. The Grand Pure Divine Ancestor's breakthrough was really good news for the ancient cultivators who were shrouded in the shadow of doomsday. But, before they could rejoice, bad news followed one after the other, and everyone was dumbfounded. Although the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had successfully entered the saint realm, the 5 half-saints and more than 10 supremes who had traveled with him had all died. Everyone was dead. Only the dying Jiang Ancestor was left. If the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had not done his best to save him, even the Jiang Ancestor would have died on the way home. At that moment, there was only one question left in everyone's hearts. How was this possible? The 9 Heavens Divine Emperor. Chapter 477. No one knew what had happened to the sacred ancestor and his group in the depths of the starry sky. No matter who asked, the sacred ancestor kept his mouth shut. One had to know that the people who had traveled with him were all the top figures of the various sects and clans. These people had died in the depths of the universe without even a corpse. Naturally, their descendants could not accept this fact. As a result, the descendants of these half-step saints jointly wrote a letter, asking the sacred ancestor to give everyone a reasonable explanation. Although the sacred ancestor had given in, he did not tell everyone what had happened in the past 20 years. Instead, he gave a simple summary, saying that his group had encountered great danger in the Great Void and that it was already a great blessing to be able to return, and then there was no more. There was not even a reasonable explanation. This time, not only the descendants of the half-step saints, but even the ordinary onlookers could not help but be puzzled. Why are you able to survive when all of your companions are dead? Moreover, you lived a better and more carefree life, and even became a saint because of this? Due to the might of a saint and the fact that all the half-step saints who could mediate with him had fallen, the sacred ancestor became the number 1 person in the heavens pivot realm after returning. No one dared to question him in front of his face, but the rumors became more and more intense in private. There were even some people who made wild guesses. The sacred ancestor and his group might have discovered the immortal emperor's treasury in the depths of the universe, and the half-step saints who accompanied them died in this treasury. Opportunities were always accompanied by risks. In the moment of danger, the sacred ancestor decisively dragged everyone down with him. As a result, he obtained the immortal emperor's inheritance and became a saint in a short 20 years. Otherwise, how could one explain the sacred ancestor's sudden increase in cultivation? This kind of baseless guess was almost equivalent to slander. Even so, the sacred ancestor was still unwilling to mention the details. In desperation, everyone could only cast their gazes on the last survivor of this trip, and that was the Jiang ancestor. At this time, it was likely that only the Jiang clan's ancestor knew what exactly happened in these 20 years. But what was regrettable was that, even though the Jiang ancestor's cultivation was extraordinary, when he was brought back by the Supreme Pure One, he was already heavily injured. For immortal cultivators, physical injuries were naturally not a problem. However, the Jiang clan's ancestor did not only have injuries on his physical body. The truly fatal injury was still the injury on his soul. It was unknown what they had experienced. In short, when the Jiang ancestor was brought back by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, he was already on the verge of death, as if he had entered a state of suspended animation. Now, the only survivor was in a vegetative state. As long as the Grand Pure One did not take the initiative to mention it, who would know the secret? Rumors were just rumors. One day, they would collapse on their own. That was because people were forgetful. As the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor began to build the Sky Capital and prepared to open the Sky Gate to lead everyone to the outside world, no one dared to talk about the Divine Ancestor in private anymore. It didn't matter how the Grand Pure Forefather had found the major world. Its appearance was like a ray of light in the darkness, illuminating the path forward for the ancient cultivators. If he continued to spread rumors and go against the venerable ancestor, wouldn't he be digging his own grave? Therefore, other than a few people led by the Jiang clan who chose to stay in the Heaven's Pivot Realm, most of the ancient immortal cultivators followed the Taiqing Divine Ancestor to the Great World. What needed to be noted here was, it was different from what Qin Shi understood. It was not that the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had given up on the Jiang clan, but that the Jiang clan had voluntarily chosen to stay in the lower realm. The reason why the Jiang clan had become a sinner clan was that after the Divine Ancestor passed away, the Jiang clan still refused to be disciplined by the Sky Capital. The Grand Pure Divine Ancestor might not care about their crime of spreading rumors in private because of their old friendship. However, the successor of the Sky Capital would definitely not tolerate anyone slandering the Divine Ancestor. Therefore, the Jiang clan was judged as a sinner clan. Even the heavens would not tolerate sinners. That was the main content recorded in the Jade Slip. Other than these old matters, what really attracted Qin Shi's attention was actually a memory from the Jiang clan ancestor. Yes, the Jiang clan ancestor's memory. No one, including the descendants of the Jiang clan, knew. Not long after the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor led the ancient immortal cultivators to the Great World, the Jiang clan ancestor, who had been in the state of a living dead, actually woke up again. Logically speaking, the Jiang clan ancestor's soul had long been shattered, and there should be no possibility of him waking up. Therefore, after the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor came to visit a few times, he never came again. Even a saint like the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor could not save him. What method did others have to wake up the Jiang clan ancestor? But here was the strange thing, just as the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor left, the Jiang clan ancestor actually woke up. At that time, only the owner of the Jade Slip was accompanying the Jiang clan ancestor, so the Jiang clan ancestor directly poured this memory into the mind of the owner of the Jade Slip. Then, as if he had obtained some kind of relief, the Jiang clan ancestor rode a crane to the west with a smile on his face. The last half-saint of the heavenly pivot realm fell. The Jiang clan ancestor left with a smile. However, after the owner of the Jade Slip obtained this memory, he was completely shocked by the scene in the memory. After thinking about it again and again, the owner of the Jade Slip decided to seal this past and record all the causes and effects into the Jade Slip. He set up a seal and waited for the fated person to know. Obviously, Qin Shi was that fated person. Therefore, he was also shocked by this memory at that time, which was why Yu Huan Tianzuan noticed something strange. It turned out that the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor and his group had never left the solar system. Just as they flew to Saturn, a dark fissure suddenly appeared in the void and sucked the group of half-sages and supreme martial artists into it. It was a boundless dark space. After the Jiang clan ancestor fell in, he was separated from the others. He flew in the dark space for thousands of years until he was exhausted and the true essence in his body was about to be exhausted. Only then did the Jiang clan ancestor discover a ray of light. Wasn't this feeling very familiar? Wasn't it exactly the same as the strange thing that she had experienced before? However, it was different from what she had experienced. After the Jiang clan ancestor escaped from the dark space, he did not go to the great world. Instead, he returned to the place where they had disappeared. Then, the Jiang clan ancestor met the grand pure divine ancestor who was quietly floating in the void and holding the heaven-bearing efficate floating mirror. At that moment, the image of the grand pure divine ancestor was completely different from the Jiang clan ancestor's memory. His appearance did not change at all. However, the monstrous pressure that was constantly emitted from his body, as well as that pair of eyes that looked down on all living things, made the Jiang clan ancestor, a half-saint, feel faintly panicked. Therefore, the Jiang clan ancestor firmly believed that the person, in front of him, was definitely not the grand pure divine ancestor he knew. As expected. Just as the Jiang clan ancestor was stunned, the grand pure divine ancestor actually aimed the heaven-bearing efficate floating mirror at him. With a flash of white light, the Jiang clan ancestor's memory was completely cut off. However, the last scene in his memory was not the scene of the grand pure divine ancestor attacking him. Instead, it was the space wonder that had already formed behind the grand pure divine ancestor, scattered stars, 9-star alignment. Chapter 478. The moment he saw the 9 stars alignment, a series of information slowly emerged in Shi's mind and gradually formed a clearer network. The dark space, the 9 stars alignment, the Tai Ching divine ancestor, the sky-bearing technique, the floating dawn mirror, the great terror in the depths of the void, and the mysterious woman entangled in chains. Until this moment, Shi finally understood what kind of terrifying level the mysterious woman's realm had reached. With the combined strength of the Tai Ching divine ancestor and the others, even in the heavenly jade domain, they were definitely a transcendent force comparable to a sacred ground. However, after they fell into the dark space, they were still so helpless. If not for the appearance of that white light, the Jiang ancestor might have been trapped alive inside. Even a supreme like she could enter and exit the dark space at will. How could a half-step sage like the Jiang ancestor not be able to freely travel through the various planes? From this, it could be seen that the Jiang ancestor was definitely controlled by some higher-level power, which caused him to be unable to successfully escape from the dark space. As for the reason why the white light appeared, combined with Shi's previous experience, it should be the result of the mysterious woman and the Great Terror's game. It was obvious that the mysterious woman was kind to the cultivators from Earth. And the Great Terror's standpoint was completely different from the mysterious woman's. This was because Shi not only felt a strong pressure from him, but also a murderous aura that seemed to be mixed with mountains of corpses and seas of blood. If that powerful murderous aura was placed in the solar system, the result would be that wherever the murderous aura went, everything would wither and not a single blade of grass would grow. In addition, from the memories of the Jiang ancestor, the Tai Ching divine ancestor should have been possessed and controlled by someone. Even a half-step sage could be easily possessed, so how high was the other party's cultivation level? Above the sage was the Immortal Emperor. Whether it was the heavenly jade domain or the heavenly pivot domain, it had been a long time since an Immortal Emperor had appeared. The Immortal Emperor seemed to only exist in the myths and legends of the primordial era. If the Supreme Shi could destroy a planet with all his strength, then the Immortal Emperor could collapse the heavens and split the earth with a flick of his finger. It was truly the definition of holding the sun and moon in one's hand and stepping on the universe. Such a terrifying cultivation had completely exceeded the scope of Shi's imagination. Perhaps when one reached the mysterious woman's level, they should no longer be called immortal cultivators, but immortals. Shi looked down at the soul mirror in his hand, and a peculiar expression suddenly appeared on his face. The 9-star alignment in the memories of the Jiang clan's ancestor was actually different from what he saw with his own eyes. In the memories of the Jiang ancestor, the Grand Pure One held the soul mirror and floated in the air like a god. As the 9 stars lined up, strange nomological imprints appeared one after another in the periphery of the solar system. These nomological imprints shone with a dazzling golden light. They were like gold foil pasted on a circular wall, encompassing the entire solar system within them. Cheng Hua, that brat, said. For the past 10,000 years, there has been a powerful seal on the periphery of the solar system. Even if a celestial venerable were to come, he would definitely die. The two of them barged in recklessly, but unexpectedly, they didn't lose their lives because of this. Instead, they arrived on Earth without any obstructions. Calculating the time, when the two of them came, wasn't it when Heaven Capital was destroyed? Could it be this seal was removed because of this? But if there's a seal on the periphery of the solar system, why was I able to pass through this seal so easily and safely return to Earth? Could it be because of that mysterious woman again? And the reason why I suddenly went to the heavenly Jade Realm, which is billions of light years away, might also be related to that mysterious woman? At the thought of this, Shi couldn't help but raise his head and look toward the distant edge of the solar system. At that moment, Shi's eyes were no longer as clear as before. Instead, they were filled with curiosity toward this unknown world like that of a little fellow. The Immortal Emperor used the universe and the starry sky as a chessboard, and all living things as chess pieces. Then, what kind of chess game were they playing? While Shi was focused on exploring the past, the young lady who had risked her life to barge into the heavenly pivot ruins had returned. However, this time, she was no longer alone. Instead, she had brought with her a team of several hundred people from the Supreme Palace enclosure. The young lady stood at the bow of the ship with an excited expression. If it weren't for the fact that there was a tall middle-aged man in his 40s standing beside her, she would have screamed out in excitement. Daddy will ask you one last time. Are you sure you really entered the heavenly pivot ruins from here? Father, I've said it many times. I really went in. There's nothing inside. If you don't believe me, let me go in first later. I'll prove it to you. The young lady's name was Tuoba Shio. The middle-aged man next to her was her father, Tabague. After Tabague received the news from his daughter, he considered the importance of this matter and didn't inform the family head immediately. Instead, he brought his personal guards and followed Tuoba Shio here. Immortal cultivators had a long lifespan. It wasn't rare for 10 generations to live in the same house. Therefore, there were usually many large families in the Supreme Palace enclosure. One could refer to the Jiang clan on Daiyu Island for this. The Xinyuan, Dongfang, and Tuoba families were all large families in the Supreme Palace enclosure. But different from Xinyuan Chenghua and Dongfang Yiji, Tuoba Shio came from a branch family. So in terms of background, Tuoba Shio was absolutely not worthy of Dongfang Yiji. And this was one of the important reasons why she was willing to die for Dongfang Yiji. From the moment the two of them started dating, Tuoba Shio felt that she wasn't worthy of Dongfang Yiji. So, she sacrificed far more than Dongfang Yiji. Under the leadership of Tuoba Shio, the group soon arrived at the location where she entered the heavenly pivot ruins. Out of caution, Tabague didn't let his daughter take the risk. Instead, he called out 2 men from the team and let them go to explore. These men were prisoners from hostile forces of the family. After being captured by the Tuoba family, they had been brainwashed and controlled by a secret method. They had completely become the Tuoba family's pawns. Although their cultivation wasn't high, they were not afraid of death. They were the best candidates to explore the way. Soon, the 2 men piloted a small starship and rushed directly to the heavenly pivot ruins. Tabague nervously waited on the side. The moment he saw the 2 figures disappear, his pupils shrank. If it weren't for Tuoba Shio, guaranteeing with her life, Tabague would never have believed her words. He was different from Tuoba Shio's naivety. Tabague knew that once this news was confirmed, it would cause a sensation in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, after sending the men to investigate, Tabague's mood was even more nervous than Tuoba Shio's. He paced back and forth on the bow of the ship. After waiting for about half an incense stick of time, Tabague finally saw the scene he had been dreaming of. Those 2 men, they actually came out of the heavenly pivot ruins unscathed. Listen to my orders, set off. Destination, heavenly pivot ruins. Calm. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 479. Chen Shi returned to the Sai courtyard with the soul mirror after learning about the Tian Shu ruins. The soul mirror. Sky-bearing technique, floating dawn mirror. It was laughable that this innate treasure, which could kill a half-step saint in the hands of the grand pure ancestor, had been treated as a useless treasure for tens of thousands of years. Therefore, when Chen Shi learned of the true power of the soul mirror, he began to think about how to take it for his own use. On one hand, it was because part of Ying's soul was still imprisoned in it. On the other hand, it was because he didn't have a single magic treasure to back him up. If he encountered an opponent weaker than himself, Chen Shi might be able to rely on his cultivation level to suppress them and win easily. However, if he encountered a half-step saint who was at the same cultivation level as him, or even a higher one, Chen Shi reckoned that he wouldn't be able to protect himself at all. Moreover, there were signs of an immortal emperor appearing in the world. Chen Shi didn't think that he could jump around in front of an immortal emperor with his mere dongshu cultivation. Although the mysterious woman didn't seem to have any enmity towards him, as the saying went, if you leaned against a mountain, it would collapse. If you leaned against a man, he would run away. The mysterious woman had already saved him once. Would she save him a second time? If he couldn't even protect himself, how could he protect his family? Therefore, the matter of increasing his strength was imperative. Chen Shi finally had some sense of crisis. If his sister-in-law knew about this, she would probably be sincerely happy for him. However, at the Dongshu realm, accumulating the world's spiritual energy wasn't so important anymore. Comprehending and applying the laws of heaven and earth was the only thing Chen Shi needed to focus on now. Therefore, Chen Shi set his sights on the strange dark space. The flow of time in the dark space was very strange. Compared to Earth, time inside could even be said to be stationary. After all, a day in the dark space was roughly equivalent to a year on Earth. What kind of terrifying time ratio was this? Although there was no matter or spiritual energy in the dark space, Chen Shi needed to calm down and stabilize his cultivation. Therefore, the dark space became the best place for him to cultivate. After entering the Dongshu realm, Chen Shi actually had the ability to travel between planes. However, the prerequisite was that he had to know the coordinates of the small plane he wanted to go to. The universe where Earth was located was the main plane. The dark space and the large world were small planes. Small planes were unstable, and at the same time, extremely difficult to discover. If he didn't leave the coordinates in advance, Chen Shi wouldn't be able to find the specific location of the small plane even if he poked a hole in the sky. This was the fundamental reason why the Grand Pure Ancestor and the others had spent so much effort to find another cave abode in the universe. Dongshu stage immortal cultivators would only be able to freely travel to and from small planes after finding them through spatial rifts and setting up coordinates in them. Night. After the little fellow fell asleep, Chen Shi couldn't wait to fly into the air and get busy. This was the first time he took the initiative to enter the dark space. Therefore, after closing his eyes and adjusting his breathing to bring his body to the best state, Chen Shi gently exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and prepared to start trying to open the passage between the two worlds. Opening the passage was actually the same as opening the heavenly gate. Therefore, the moment Chen Shi moved, an extremely strong spiritual energy fluctuation was set off 10,000 meters in the sky. Under the guidance of the spiritual energy, the clouds were like a vortex, gradually forming a huge cyclone. Then, an extremely dazzling light suddenly bloomed in the center of the cyclone. Like the heavenly gate, the position of the light was obviously the entrance of the passage between the two worlds. Seeing this, Chen Shi didn't hesitate at all. His body swayed and he directly flew toward the light. It was like diving from a high platform. The moment Chen Shi's body disappeared into the light, the entire world suddenly quieted down. There was no sound and no light. He was back. Chen Shi lit up a ball of light and looked around. After confirming that he was back in the familiar dark space, he directly sat cross-legged in this endless void. At this moment, he was the only source of light in this dark space. As the deduction continued, two faintly discernible golden lines gradually appeared beside Chen Shi. These were the two lines of law that he currently controlled. One led to Earth, the other to the outside world. 2 points as a line. As long as he found the base of the two planes, he could use this line of law to travel back and forth between the two worlds. Point, line, surface, body. And this was the basic form of the first law of heaven and earth. When Chen Shi was able to freely control face, his cultivation would naturally be able to take another step forward. Today was the weekend. Primary school students did not have to go to school on weekends, so every Saturday night, the little girl would play until late into the night, until the next morning when she would wake up. Early in the morning, the little girl did not see Chen Shi when she woke up, so she took advantage of the time when Qin Ruoying was cooking for her to stroll around the courtyard. After this period of time together, Cheng Hua and Yi Ji were already very familiar with the little girl. Therefore, when the little girls saw the two dejected coming out of the room, she enthusiastically greeted them, "Brother Cheng Hua, Brother Yi Ji, good morning." "Good morning, Nian Nian, good morning to you." Cheng Hua did not say anything, and Yi Ji did not seem to be in a good mood. After trying hard to squeeze out a smile at the little girl, the two were like students who had made a mistake, obediently waiting outside the Chuehua gate for Qin Xueqing's call. It was not that they were deliberately giving the little girl a hard time, but the reason why their mood was so heavy was because today was the day of being beaten again. Qin Wanqing was incredible now. After this period of actual combat tempering, she had completely walked out of a martial artist's path that belonged to her. So even if the two of them attacked together, they were not her match at all. Qin Xueqing seemed to be very vengeful. As her strength grew stronger, her attacks became more and more ruthless, so that the two of them would be beaten half to death by her every time. Although their lives were not in danger, but it was really painful. Looking at the two of them now, where was the young and frivolous attitude they had when they first came here? Their injuries had just recovered, and sister-in-law was ready to ask them to go out to practice again. The little girl did not know the details. Therefore, when she saw Qin Xueqing coming out of the room, she enthusiastically greeted Qin Xueqing. "Aunt, are you going out to play? Can you bring me along?" Hearing this, Qin Xueqing suddenly stopped in her tracks. She lowered her head and looked at the cute little niece in front of her, who was like a porcelain doll. Looking at her big bright eyes, Qin Xueqing could not help but hesitate for a moment, as if she was thinking about something. After a while, Qin Xueqing made a decision in her heart. Didn't Chen Shi not want Nian Nian to cultivate? Then I'll make her want to learn. Therefore, Qin Xueqing was like an evil woman who used a lollipop to lure a little girl, and for the first time, a smile hung on her face. "Nian Nian, Aunt wants to take them to practice martial arts. It's the kind of martial arts that you see on TV. Do you want to learn? If you want to learn, Aunt can teach you." Jiutian Divine Emperor. Chapter 480. Martial Arts? After hearing Qin Xueqing's words, the little fellow suddenly blinked her eyes blankly. It was no wonder that her reaction would be so cute and slow. After all, Nian Nian was still young. Currently, she was only at the age where she liked to watch cartoons. Although it was not that she had never watched wuxia movies, but the wuxia movies that were popular in recent years could not be regarded as wuxia movies in the true sense. At best, they could only be regarded as historical romance movies. Just based on those melodramatic romantic scenes, how could they win the hearts of children? Therefore, the little fellow's impression of martial arts was completely at the ignorant stage. She could not be compared to the children of the 80s and 90s. 20 or 30 years ago, children usually liked to use a wooden stick as a long sword. They learned the martial arts moves on TV, and before they made a move, they must shout out the name of the move. For example, the 18 dragons subduing palms, 9 strategies beyond the swords, Buddha's palm and other martial arts skills. Basically every child knew 1 or 2 moves. Thinking about it, he felt a little regretful. It was a pity that the little fellow was not born in the hot-blooded era where the martial arts atmosphere was pervasive. Qin Xueqing's attitude towards the little fellow had always been neither cold nor warm. Today, she rarely took the initiative to take her to play, so the little fellow was naturally very happy. Therefore, she immediately blinked her big bright eyes, and then slightly tilted her head and asked in a coquettish voice, "Auntie, what is martial arts? Is it fun?" "It's fun. After you learn it, you can be like the heroes on TV, there's nothing you can't do. Really? Of course, why would Auntie lie to you? At this moment, the smile on Qin Shueqing's face was really very bright. Looking at her proud look, she was simply like a demon holding candy to lure a little girl. She was just short of raising her tail. Hey, you two come over here, I'll show Ninian what martial arts are. Qin Shueqing had always been taciturn. Today, in order to lure the little fellow to take the bait, she really used 120% of her strength. Seeing that the little guy seemed to be tempted, Qin Shueqing immediately let Cheng Hua and Yi Ji come to the center of the courtyard, ready to use them as punching bags to show the little guy what martial arts were. Since he said it was martial arts, then he definitely couldn't use magic. Cheng Hua and Yi Ji had been beaten up all this time, and under the influence of what they heard and saw, the two of them had learned a few fierce moves. As a result, a scene that shocked the little fellow appeared. In the center of the courtyard, Qin Shueqing was like a graceful butterfly, sometimes leaping up, sometimes crouching on the ground, twisting and turning, displaying her graceful figure. Perhaps it was because Qin Shueqing rarely sparred with others in the outside world, so even though her martial cultivation was extremely profound, she still lacked the fierce killing intent that came from mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Therefore, her martial arts looked more like a dance. It's beautiful. Auntie is so beautiful. Since it was an exhibition match, Qin Shueqing's moves were naturally more gentle than usual, and it could be said that she didn't overdo it. The little fellow couldn't see the subtlety of it, but he was still completely attracted by her graceful dancing posture, so he excitedly clapped at the side. Looking at the little fellow's eager appearance, Qin Shueqing couldn't help but smile slightly. After forcing Cheng Hua and Yi Ji back with one palm, she lightly landed beside the little fellow, then asked with a smile, "How is it, do you want to learn?" Hearing this, the little fellow immediately nodded his head like he was pounding garlic. Yes. Okay, then come over here, Auntie will help you stretch your tendons and pull out your bones, okay? The little fellow didn't understand, only thinking that Qin Shueqing wanted to play a game with him, so he eagerly went over. Just as Qin Shueqing was teaching the little fellow the horse stance, Chen Shi finally returned to the courtyard. This was the first time he entered the dark space, and he hadn't figured out the specific time ratio between the two worlds, so it caused him to come back slightly late. If it was in the past, it wouldn't be a problem if Chen Shi came back a little late. But today was different. Qin Shueqing actually took advantage of his absence to start teaching the little fellow cultivation. Therefore, the moment Chen Shi's figure appeared in the courtyard, the temperature seemed to drop a lot. What are you doing? Chen Shi's tone didn't have any emotional fluctuations, as if he was talking about something very ordinary, but those who were familiar with him should know. This was a sign that he was angry. Chen Shi was angry? After realizing that something big might happen next, Cheng Hua and Yi Ji immediately looked at each other, then quietly left the courtyard. It wasn't good to stay here for long, leaving was the best plan. At this moment, the little fellow also noticed Chen Shi's figure, so she immediately stopped what she was doing and ran towards Chen Shi eagerly. "Daddy, you're back." The little fellow happily jumped into Chen Shi's arms. Chen Shi gently pinched her little face, then directly carried her from the ground. "Yes, Daddy went out to do something just now, so I didn't have time to make breakfast for you." "You're not hungry, are you?" "I'm not hungry." The father and daughter talked as if there was no one else around, while Qin Shueqing waited silently by the side. When Chen Shi looked at her, Qin Shueqing calmly replied, "I'm teaching her martial arts." Hearing this, before Chen Shi could reply, the little fellow happily interrupted and shouted, "Auntie is teaching me martial arts, it's very fun." "Daddy, do you want to learn?" "Is that so?" Chen Shi chuckled. He gently reached out and pinched the tip of the little fellow's nose, which immediately caused her to act coquettishly. Chen Shi seemed to be trying to make the little girl happy, but a question suddenly popped out of her mouth. "Why did you teach her without my permission?" It had to be said that his sister-in-law's behavior today really annoyed Chen Shi a little. After all, from the day he returned to Earth, he had made up his mind to create an ordinary and happy childhood for the little fellow, just like ordinary children, to enjoy the pure happiness that they should enjoy at their age. The road of cultivation was long, but childhood was only a few short years. Did he want to deprive her of even these short years? She's willing to learn, I'm willing to teach, it's that simple. Then did you ask for my consent? Do you need it? Don't you need it? Hearing this, Qin Shueqing couldn't help but sneer, and coldly replied, I started practicing martial arts when I was 3 years old. I had already practiced obvious strength when I was her age. Since learning martial arts is good for the body, why don't you let her learn? She's just a child. This time, Qin Shi was really a little angry, so even his tone became much colder. Seeing this, Qin Shueqing was not afraid. Instead, she righteously retorted, she is also a person with the ability to think independently. Please ask her whether she is willing to do it before you make a decision for her. Being choked by Qin Shueqing, Qin Shi was so angry that he couldn't even speak. At this moment, the atmosphere in the yard was really a little awkward. The little fellow lay on Qin Shi's shoulder, looking left and right at her father, right at her aunt, completely not understanding what they were quarreling about. But fortunately, just when Qin Shi and Qin Shueqing were in a deadlock, Qin Ruoying suddenly appeared. She was holding a bowl of hot porridge in her hand, which was the white fungus and lotus seed porridge that she personally cooked for the little fellow. Nian, come in and eat. Chapter 481. Eat? After hearing Qin Ruoying's call, the little fellow's eyes suddenly lit up. So, she immediately signaled Qin Shi to put her down, and then ran back to the west wing with Qin Ruoying. In fact, how could the little fellow not know that her father was quarreling with her aunt? Although she didn't understand why the two were quarreling, it was the first time such a hostile scene appeared in the courtyard, so it made the little fellow feel very awkward. Therefore, after hearing Qin Ruoying's call, the little fellow directly ran away like Chenghua and Yiji. Sister, you judge, do you think what I said makes sense? Qin Shueqing had long known about Qin Ruoying's memory loss, but because she was now angry, she wanted to pull Qin Ruoying, such a strong foreign aide, to support her. After hearing Qin Shueqing's question, Qin Ruoying, who had already walked up the stairs of the west wing, also stopped. But unfortunately, Qin Ruoying didn't intend to turn back to support her. It's none of my business, you guys can quarrel slowly. After saying this sentence very calmly, Qin Ruoying took the bowl back to the room. Qin Shueqing didn't have much reaction to this. Because she already knew that with Qin Ruoying's current character, she wouldn't care about anyone other than Nian. And the reason why she still chose to ask Qin Ruoying was because she didn't want to continue to be in a deadlock with Qin Shi. Therefore, after hearing Qin Ruoying's answer, Qin Shueqing rolled her eyes at Qin Shi, and then turned back to the east wing without looking back. This is great. In the courtyard, which was very lively just now, in the blink of an eye, only Qin Shi was left alone. Qin Shi was really depressed in his heart, but there was nowhere to vent, so he could only return to the guest room with a stomach full of resentment like the two sisters. What could he do? Was he going to beat his sister-in-law? This was the first time that someone questioned Qin Shi's education philosophy. Long before Qin Ruoying lost her memory, Qin Shi had already discussed with Qin Ruoying whether to teach the little fellow to cultivate. Unlike Qin Shi's firm attitude, Qin Ruoying's attitude at that time was somewhat ambiguous. She neither agreed nor opposed, as if she wanted to leave this decision to the little fellow herself. But how old was Nian? How could she understand what cultivation meant? It was also because of this that Qin Shi never thought of teaching Nian cultivation. Qin Shueqing's words seemed to be very reasonable, but she had never even had a boyfriend, so raising a child, she knew nothing. Qin Shi sulked in the room. But after thinking about it, his mind was still haunted by Qin Shueqing's powerful question. She is also a person with the ability to think independently. Please ask her if she agrees before you make a decision for her. Am I really meddling too much? Across the wall, Qin Shi muttered to himself. Then, as if he had thought of something, he suddenly got up and quickly left the room, then came to the outside of the west wing, and looked at the mother and daughter in the room through the window. In the room, the little fellow was holding a big bowl of porridge and slurping it. Qin Ruoying sat next to her and whispered from time to time, "Drink slowly, be careful not to choke." What a beautiful scene this was. Seeing this scene, Qinshi's depression in his heart suddenly disappeared. He silently waited outside the window. After the little fellow finished her breakfast, she looked back and saw that her father was still outside the room. She immediately became as happy as a little bird, opened her arms and threw herself directly into Qinshi's arms. "Dad, the porridge made by Mom is delicious. But Mom also said that you can't eat it. Dad, are you envious of me, haha?" Hearing this, Qinshi couldn't help but laugh and pinch her little face, pretending to scare her. "Eat, eat, eat, all you know is to eat all day. Be careful, you will become a big fatty in the future, then no one will like you." "Why won't anyone like me if I become fat?" "Dad, didn't you say that you like me the most?" The little fellow pouted unhappily, as if she was angry. Seeing this, Qinshi could only quickly coax her. "Dad will definitely like you, no matter how you look in the future. In Dad's heart, Nian will always be the most beautiful girl in the world." After hearing Qinshi's answer, the little fellow rolled her big eyes and suddenly grinned. "What about Mom? Is Mom not beautiful?" "Mom is as beautiful as you." "Really?" "Of course, you are Mom's child, how could you look different from Mom?" "That's right. Then when I grow up, I will definitely be as beautiful as Mom." As if she had encountered something extremely happy, the little fellow giggled, which made Qinshi couldn't help but laugh foolishly with her. The father and daughter stood on the steps and whispered to each other. After Qin Ruoying cleaned up the table and prepared to go back to the kitchen to wash the dishes, Qinshi offered to help her wash the dishes. Unexpectedly, Qin Ruoying didn't even look at him. She carried the bowl and chopsticks to the kitchen, minding her own business. Qinshi had long been used to Qin Ruoying's current attitude, so he didn't take it to heart. Seeing that his wife didn't need his help, he carried the little fellow back to the guest room where he was currently staying. Just as he returned to the room, Qinshi put away the smile on his face, and with a very serious expression, he looked at the little fellow and asked, "Nian, tell Dad honestly, do you like the things that Auntie taught you?" Hearing this, the little fellow blinked her eyes, as if she didn't quite understand the meaning of his words. Just as Qinshi expected, she was only a 6-year-old child. How could she understand what cultivation meant? It was like parents sending their children to learn music, art, and dance. Without the guidance of parents, no matter how talented a child was, it was impossible to be naturally interested in these things. And on this question, Qinshi did indeed make a mistake. That was, he had never let the little fellow come into contact with cultivation, so how could he judge whether the little fellow liked cultivation or not? His sister-in-law wasn't wrong. Since Nian was a person with the ability to think independently, then she should have her own choice. Just like learning music, art, and dance. There were no disadvantages to cultivation, instead, there were countless benefits. So, on the premise that he had the resources in this area, why couldn't he leave the choice to the little fellow herself? If Nian liked it, he would teach her. If Nian didn't like it, then it was fine not to learn. Therefore, after thinking this point through, Qinshi very solemnly handed the choice to the little fellow. "Nian, tell Dad, do you want to learn?" 9 Heaven's Divine Emperor. Chapter 482. Do you want to learn? The little fellow was not used to Qinshi being so serious. Therefore, while she was thinking hard about the true meaning of this sentence, she couldn't help but put her thumb in her mouth. While sucking on her finger, she tilted her head and seriously thought about her father's words. "You're not allowed to eat your finger." Qinshi saw the little fellow's hesitation. Therefore, he gently removed the little fellow's finger from her mouth and hugged her in his arms. Then, using a very gentle tone, he asked again, "Don't be afraid, just tell Daddy if you want to learn or not. If you want to learn, Daddy will teach you. I promise I'll teach you better than Auntie." After hearing Qinshi's words, the little fellow finally reacted. She rubbed her head against Qinshi's shoulder a few times before hesitantly replying, "Yes." Her voice fell. Without waiting for Qinshi's reply, the little fellow looked up nervously and asked, "Daddy, is learning to dance very difficult? There are many children in our class learning to dance." They say learning to dance is very, very tiring and very painful. I'm not afraid of being tired. But I'm afraid of pain. The little fellow's voice became softer and softer until it was almost inaudible like a mosquito. At this moment, Qinshi finally understood her thoughts. After all this time, the child actually understood learning martial arts as learning to dance. Qinshi did not know whether to laugh or cry. Looking at the little fellow's reluctant look, Qinshi could not help but smile and rub her little head. Then, he carried her to the bed and said to her with a serious face, "Mian Mian, you have to know. No matter what you learn, before you learn it, it will be a very difficult and tiring process. So before you choose to learn, you have to make up your mind and confirm if you can really endure this hardship. If you feel tired and tiring halfway through learning, or even unwilling to learn anymore, then no matter if you learn to dance, learn to draw, or learn anything else, you are destined to achieve nothing. So you must remember what I said to you today. There is only one way to fail, and that is to give up halfway. Once you've made your choice, you have to persevere no matter how hard it is. Do you understand?" Qinshi tried his best to speak slowly so that the little fellow could hear every word he said. After hearing this, the little fellow's reaction was just as Qinshi had expected. After all, Mian Mian had never been a spoiled child who was afraid of hardship and fatigue. She could understand and distinguish right from wrong. Therefore, when Qinshi asked her again if she wanted to learn, the little girl's hesitation disappeared and turned into determination. Yes. Whether it was learning martial arts or dancing, it was fine. The little fellow's attitude was what Qinshi really cared about. Since she had already made up her mind, how could Qinshi stop her? "Alright, then Daddy will teach you personally. Remember, don't listen to your aunt in the future. Jingle, jingle, jingle. What does she know? Daddy can flatten her with one hand. Come, sit down first. Daddy will teach you how to draw qi into your body. Don't worry, it won't hurt at all." Qinshi finally began to teach the little fellow cultivation. Of course, the things he taught were completely different from what Qin Shueqing taught. Qin Shueqing only wanted to teach the little fellow martial arts, but Qinshi directly taught her the immortal cultivation method. So the question was, why didn't her sister-in-law directly teach the little fellow the immortal cultivation method that Qinshi taught her? Instead, she only taught the little fellow some basic skills of tendons and bones. One had to know that her sister-in-law had been a heavenly being for a long time and was already considered a real immortal cultivator. The reason why she didn't directly teach the little fellow cultivation was actually because she had considered Qinshi's attitude towards this matter. Therefore, she used martial arts as an excuse to indirectly remind Qinshi. The child was not young anymore, so she naturally knew what to do and what not to do. Since cultivation was not harmful to the little fellow, and it could even strengthen her body and enhance her physique, why didn't she learn it? Swords and sabers were innocent, and sins were all caused by people's hearts. Qin Shueqing's point of view was not wrong, so although she had a sour face all day long, her heart was warm. Qinshi was afraid that the little fellow would accidentally hurt other children at school, but with the little fellow's current wisdom, how could she bully others for no reason? After all, she was now a class leader, a young pioneer, and a candidate for the school's 3 good students. Under Qinshi's careful guidance, the little fellow embarked on her own journey of cultivation in a daze. At the same time, Tuoba Xiu hurried to Earth with her reinforcements. Unlike Tuoba Xiu's excitement, although Tobague was also very excited, he was more nervous and puzzled in his heart. There were too many rumors about the Dubhe ruins, so even though Tobague was now in this peaceful galaxy, he still felt like he was in a dream. Out of safety considerations, Tobague didn't send out any death warriors to explore the planets. Instead, he used his divine sense to quickly sweep the planets. After determining that there were no signs of surging heaven and earth spiritual energy, he hurried to the next planet. Their journey here had been too smooth. It was different from the mountains of knives, seas of fire, and hellish danger that people had always imagined. The so-called Dubhe ruins was in fact an ordinary galaxy that couldn't be more ordinary. There was only one star in this galaxy, and although the rest of the planets were large, they weren't life planets at all. There wasn't even a bit of heaven and earth spiritual energy in the periphery. There was no spiritual energy, no life. Naturally, it was impossible to give birth to any ancient vicious beasts, evil spirits, or other such terrifying existences. Therefore, Tobagaway couldn't help but wonder if he had come to the wrong place. How could such a broken place be called an Empyrean forbidden area? Could it be, his cultivation was too low, so he couldn't discern the mystery? Tobagaway was really puzzled. But at this time, the lookout who had been standing at the bow of the ship and observing the situation suddenly cried out in alarm. "Look! There's someone there." The moment Tobagaway heard these words, it was as if he had been electrocuted. He suddenly shot up from his chair and flew to the bow of the ship at the fastest speed he had ever flown in his life. "Where is it?" Before Tobagaway arrived, Tobagaway's voice had already sounded in the lookout's ear. The lookout pointed. Just as Tobagaway was about to speak, Tobagaway had already turned and rushed to the helm of the ship. "Turn the helm and head to that planet. From now on, listen to my orders in all matters. Don't make a move without permission. If the situation changes, I will use the cup as a signal to kill all of you. Remember. Remember." As Tobagaway issued a series of orders, the incomparably huge Star Cha also turned around and flew towards the seemingly small moon. Calm. Wonderful book house.